Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku can draw and summon Marvel Mutants? Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Izuku, 10, was sitting in class sketching the outline of a raven because he had seen one earlier today and wanted to draw one. As usual, he drowned out the class chatter while he was drawing it. He didn't like any of them because they were all making fun of him, and he was just relieved that they were letting him be alone at the moment. As Katsuki approached him, he exclaimed, "What the fuck is that, Deku?" Izuku was drawing, and he gave him a gloomy smile and said, "Don't worry, I'll help." After tearing the book away from Izuku, he blew it up in front of him, leaving only ashes behind, before Izuku could demand that he return it. Katsuki put his hand on Izuku's cheek and gave it a light slap, releasing an explosion while being careful not to hit the number on his head. "You're quirkless, Deku. You're not supposed to do anything other than be our punching bag, so do me a favor and remember that or I'll give you another scar," he said. Izuku winced a euro, not because he was uncomfortable, but because he was accustomed to it. It was caused by the explosion striking a portion of his eye, causing it to sting in agony. "Good morning, everyone. Please go to your seats so we can get started." Katsuki was about to say something else when the teacher entered the room. She placed her belongings on her desk and asked, "Midoriya, did you make that mess?" He remained silent and squirmed further in his chair in an attempt to blend in. He detested having all of these eyes on him and didn't want to be here, but he also didn't want to skip school and force his mother to leave work in order to come here and speak with the principal. "I see. Well, that's detention for you because you made a mess. You'll have to stay after school for an hour and clean this room till it's spotless or else that's more detention," she grumbled. Izuku did his best to blend in with his uniform, simply nodding his head and remaining silent. "Anyways, let's get back to our lesson on Quirk history. We left off yesterday on during the Quirk Civil War here in Japan where the Quirk people rose up and overthrew the Quirkless people who were oppressing us for so long. Thanks to that our society is better and those that are meant to lead are in charge while the ones without quirks are punished," she continued. Everyone grinned when they heard that, and some of them glared at Izuku or threw objects at him. He simply nodded his head and began to pick up the books and pencils that had been thrown at him when she said, "Midoriya, stop making a mess, you're distracting our class." Now, as I mentioned before, I was cut off. Following the 3-year, bloody civil war, we toppled the previous government and established a new one in which people with strong personalities are given the opportunity to accomplish great things, while those without them are left to handle all the busy work. The teacher said, "For the quirkless ones, they are all persecuted and now have to pay very heavy taxes in addition to being denied medical care or anything to help them with life, given the war crimes they committed against us and for standing up against the true leaders. Thanks to this the Quirk society is even stronger than before and soon we'll finally be rid of the remnants of the quirkless people which is only 3% of the population and soon have a happy and pure society that's only meant for those that have heroic quirks that society and our government approve of." Izuku quickly threw them out when he covered the number on his temple with his hand on the side of his head, indicating that he was quirkless. In reality, he wasn't, but the doctors didn't understand how it worked and nothing they tried made it work, so they simply labeled him quirkless. His thoughts turned to his mother and how difficult her life is. It deeply wounded him because she works 2 jobs, comes home, and always makes sure he has food and clean clothes, regardless of her own well-being or happiness. The day went on, and before long, school was out, and everyone started to depart, with the exception of Izuku, who had to stay later and tidy the classroom because he was in detention. Unfortunately for him, in order to force him to do more, the students made sure to leave the classroom in disarray. While attempting to remove the Sharpie marks from a desk, he sadly asked himself, "What did I do to deserve this?" After cleaning the desks for an hour, he finally finished and was told to go home. He sighed as he did so. He raised his hood while he was walking in an attempt to conceal the tattoo from onlookers. As he reached the store, where a kind elderly woman was in charge, he thought, "I need to stop and get another sketchbook since Kachan blew up my last one. Why can't I just have something nice?" She not only charged him regular prices rather than the tripled price for the quirkless tax that was put in years before he was born, but she was also the only person other than his mother who was kind to him. The elderly woman smiled warmly and said, "Oh Midoriya, are we getting another book today? My, you must draw a lot to come in so often. You have to show me your drawings one day." Izuku laughed and scratched the back of his head, not wanting to share his troubles with her because she was already doing enough by treating him like a human and not charging him twice. Yeah, I'll be sure to show you some next time I come in, Mrs. Uku, Izuku replied. Mrs. Uku grinned and said, okay, let's ring you up. She always liked seeing children happy these days. Instead of charging him the usual 3,567 yen and 15 cents $26 that every other store would have, she squeezed it up to 1,783 yen and 57 cents $13. He left for home, only to discover that his mother was not there. She had to get up at 6 in the morning to spend time with Izuku and get ready for work, so she wouldn't be returning from her second job until about 12 to 2 at night. In an attempt to make things easier for his mother tonight, Izuku went over and put his belongings in his room before entering the kitchen and beginning to prepare dinner for the two of them. In order to prepare some katsudon for them, he gathered the eggs, pork chops, and breading. He then grabbed the rice and started cooking it. After some time, the dinner was finished, and he finished his share before putting the remainder away for his mother to eat when she gets home from work later tonight. Izuku sighed and began working on the assignment his teacher had given him. It took him until nearly 8 o'clock to finish, but after he did, he was able to begin working on his sketchbook. After taking it from the bag and placing it on the desk, he remembered the raven he had intended to sketch earlier. Reaching over, he took out the pencil and started drawing it, beginning with the outline before working in. I remember hearing that when people have friends they show things they like to do. But I don't remember what it's like to have a friend, Izuku said, trailing his hand over the drawing, which he completed after 4.5 hours. Before him was a flawless drawing of a raven that appeared almost realistic. With regret, he uttered, I just wish I had a friend. He never saw a spark of energy travel from his hand to the drawing as he kept moving his hand over it. Instead, it glowed a faint yellowish-purple light. Izuku was completely bewildered when, after a few moments, it became bright enough for him to notice. He took a few steps back and landed on his bed, where he watched the drawing continue to glow, which made him even more anxious because he had no idea what was happening. When he heard a loud puff of smoke, the light suddenly dimmed and the room returned to normal, with only the ceiling light remaining as the source of illumination. The light had become so bright that he had to cover his eyes. Izuku drew a raven, but it was alive. He stared at it as he slowly lowered his hand. Hello, what are you? It was asking him as it stood atop the paper. Izuku had a strange feeling in the back of his head, almost as if it was telling him it had no name, but the raven cocked its head to the side without saying anything. In a nervous tone, he asked, "See, can you understand me?" The sensation returned and it seemed as though the raven had said, "Yes," when it clicked its beak. Izuku asked, Are you my Quirk?" As tears threatened to fall down his cheeks and a bubble of joy and hope grew in his chest. The raven flapped its wings and clicked its beak once more before swooping over and landing on the bed beside Izuku. In the back of his mind, he had the same sensation, but now it seemed as though the raven was requesting to be petted. He slowly reached down and gave it a gentle pat, causing it to click its beak with joy, and Izuku could sense how happy it was. Izuku finally developed a quirk, and he couldn't help but cry with joy. In addition to the fact that his mother's life will improve along with his, he wasn't a mistake as everyone claimed. What can you do?" replied Izuku. "Oh, I'm sorry I didn't ask you what's your name." Izuku thought the raven was saying that it didn't have a beak when it clicked its beak. "Well, would you like me to name you?" He knew he was saying yes when he clicked with joy. "Okay, how about Maverick?" Izuku thought the raven was glaring at him as it looked at him. "Okay. Then how about Eclipse?" The raven now turned its head away, indicating that it also didn't like that name. Izuku felt horrible now because he had never been very good at names, but he looked at the raven's black feathers and then at the night sky outside the window. He mumbled, "Nightcrawler." Unexpectedly, the raven expressed his happiness by flapping its wings and clicking its beak. Izuku smiled and said, "Okay, your name is Nightcrawler from now on." "Oh, what can you do?" Nightcrawler spread its wings, flew to Izuku, and landed on his shoulder before changing into a black jacket that resembled a haori and had a golden trim and a red lining inside. Izuku couldn't quite put into words how it felt, but it was almost like Nightcrawler was holding him and comforting him in this way. The coat, however, lifted him into the air and caused him to float above the ground before he could say anything more. Izuku exclaimed with excitement, "Whoa, you can let me fly. TT, this is amazing." Nightcrawler then transformed back into a raven and sat on Izuku's shoulder after being gently set back on the ground. Izuku asked, "So, are you hungry?" He was aware that he was hungry because of a sensation in the back of his mind. As he entered the kitchen, he said, "Well, okay, let's get you some food then." He opened the refrigerator and searched for food, but Nightcrawler saw an apple and clicked at it. Feeling the urge, Izuku eyed the apple, then picked it up and started chopping it up before setting it in a bowl for Nightcrawler to consume. As Nightcrawler ate, Izuku felt the hunger subside as the raven leapt to the ground and started munching on the apple. Izuku was unable to resist watching him eat, so he reached out and began to pet Nightcrawler gently. The crow appeared to enjoy the attention as it kept eating. After a very long day of work, Inko arrived at the front door just as it was opening. She was extremely grateful and happy that her night manager had sent her home early because they had all caught up. Despite the fact that it was a weekend night, she expected to find Izuku at the kitchen counter feeding a crow when she got home, rather than a dark apartment with him sound asleep. She rubbed her eyes to check if she was dreaming because she was so exhausted. "Izuku, is that a crow?" she asked. As he joyfully ran to her, he exclaimed, "Mom, my Quirk works and he's part of it." Inko appeared somewhat doubtful, but Izuku lifted his arm and summoned the crow, which landed on his forearm and clicked its beak. Inko was shocked when the crow turned to face her and bowed its head slightly in respect. Confused, she asked, "Sweetie, what do you mean this is your Quirk?" Before trying to think of what inspired him to create Nightcrawler, Izuku said, "Well, a little while ago I went into my room and I began drawing a crow on my new sketchbook. After a couple hours I was done and It took him a minute, but he was able to recall his feelings. I was feeling lonely. I wish I had a friend who'd comfort me and just be friends with me." After hearing that, Inko's heart ached, but she turned to face the crow, who approached Izuku's shoulder and pressed its head against his cheek in an attempt to console him, which fortunately caused him to smile. Normally, Inko would freak out and tell them to go to the hospital, but after everything he's been through, she doesn't want her son to end up as a test subject while the scientists and doctors try to figure out what he's doing. She suddenly recalled that Recovery Girl would be visiting the hospital on Monday to treat a seriously injured patient. Since Recovery Girl is one of the few well-known physicians who can treat patients without any peculiarities, she might have the opportunity to speak with her and ask for assistance. With the hope that this would bring Izuku joy once more and restore her son's constant happiness, Inko asked inquisitively, "So sweetie, what else can your Quirk do? And if you said you drew it and the crow appeared, could you draw something else?" After giving it some thought, Izuku decided he wasn't sure, so he hurried back to his room, took out his old sketchbook, and returned with it. Setting it on the table, he turned the pages until he found a drawing he had done some time before. He had no idea why, but he wanted to draw a butler because he had seen one in an anime once and remembered seeing Alfred, the butler, when he was watching Batman. He drew the butler he wanted to have. Izuku put his hand on the page and considered the behavior he wanted from his butler. He wanted him to be devoted and kind, to want to help others, but also to be able to defend them and voice his own opinions if he didn't agree. When Izuku felt as though a portion of his energy was being taken away, he sighed, took a deep breath, put his hands on it, and focused intently on it. At first, nothing happened, which caused him to frown, so he tried again, but nothing happened again. A spark of energy then moved from his hand to the drawing on the paper, and it began to glow a very faint yellowish-purple light that only grew brighter by the second. This time, it appeared to be 3 times brighter than it had been when Izuku called forth Nightcrawler. The drawing showed a man who looked like an elderly butler, dressed elegantly in his traditional black uniform, and a big puff of smoke. Like his flawless beard, his hair is completely white. Although he appears gentle due to the obvious wrinkles on his hollow face, his eyes are as sharp as an eagle's. He was extremely muscular and had broad shoulders, as evidenced by his well-built physique. "Hello, master, it's a pleasure to finally meet you," the man said in a soft voice that was both gentle and powerful. He glanced around the room before turning to face Izuku, who was easily taller than the 10-year-old. Izuku looked at his hands in complete shock before saying, hello. Do you know who I am and who you are?" to the man in front of him. The butler looked up at Izuku and said, "Why yes, I am your butler that you created, and my job is to do that as a butler as well as protect you, for my name I sadly do not have one." For a moment, Izuku stared at him in awe of how this worked. It appeared that he could call forth people if he drew them and considered the behavior or character he wanted them to have. However, that also caused him to consider another possibility. would he be able to call forth a different kind of person or creature, or perhaps something else entirely? Would they follow his instructions or would they be based on his perception of them or their nature? He said, how about Sebastien, to the butler. The now named Sebas got up and said, "That is a very fine name, my master. My lady, would you like me to draw you a warm bath and help you get some fresh clothes?" he asked. Given that her son had just called a real butler for them, Inko blushed and nodded her head, unsure of what to say. As he left, Sebas said, "Very well, if you need me, I'll only be a call away." He was able to locate every item in the house thanks to his connection to Izuku's memories. "Izuku, sweetie, I'm not trying to sound jealous but I'm kind of jealous," said Inko. He simply laughed and said, sorry mom. Don't be sorry, be happy, you finally have your quirk and it's a powerful one at that. With this I'm sure you will be a powerful hero and save everyone," Inko said, shaking her head and rushing out of her funk to approach Izuku. "Why you really think so mom?" Izuku asked with a joyful tone. "Yes sweetie, I know I haven't been the best mother in the world. Heck, I've been a crappy mother for not making you have the life you deserve. But I promise you Izuku, I will make up for that and make you the happiest boy in the world," replied Inko. "What mom, you don't need to do that. And besides, I know how hard you have to work and because of that you are the best mom. I wouldn't trade you for the world mom, I love you." "I love you too sweetie. And I promise you from this day forward I will do everything I can to make your life better, okay?" Inko said, embracing Izuku tightly as she felt some tears streaming down her cheeks. Izuku wanted to object, but he was stopped by his mother's tired yet affectionate gaze. His mother is even more obstinate than he is, and like him, nothing can stop her once she sets her mind to something. He said, unsure of what to do, "Okay mom. But what should I do about my quirk?" Izuku had a quirk, but the doctors didn't know what it was or how it worked, so they simply called him quirkless and destroyed his life. Inko remained silent because she didn't know either. As a result, nobody would understand how this oddball child suddenly developed a peculiarity. As he entered the room from the bathroom, where the tub was filling with warm water, Sebas said, "If I may, I have a suggestion. I suggest that Master Izuku doesn't tell anyone about his quirk and you my lady should find someone you can trust to help him with this." When Inko's thoughts returned to Recovery Girl, she turned back to Izuku and noticed the scars on his neck that were visible through his shirt, as well as the number on the side of his head. "You're not going to school Monday, you're coming with me to work and we are going to get someone's help." That gave Izuku joy because it meant he would be spending another day away from his tormentors. Both Nightcrawler and Sebas experienced a brief glimpse of Izuku's memories, witnessed the extent of his suffering, and felt anger rising within them for the way others treated their master. Izuku was unaware of this and kept cheering in silence because he wouldn't have to limp home or conceal any more wounds from his mother. And with that, the weekend passed by in the blink of an eye. Izuku discovered that they can live in his mind and summon themselves when the need for his summons is not present. He had an idea that's where he and Nightcrawler went, but he wasn't entirely sure how it worked himself. In addition, Sebas always made sure that Inko and Izuku had delicious meals prepared for them, that the house was immaculate, and that they were dressed in clean clothes. Naturally, both Midoriyas attempted to stop him, but he persisted in telling him that this was his job and was more obstinate than Izuku and Inko combined. Inko advised Izuku to wait until they see a doctor because she didn't want him to hurt himself, even though he wanted to see if he could call in more people. As the days passed quickly, Izuku found himself waiting for his mother to return from her attempt to speak with Recovery Girl in the hospital's waiting room. He kept drawing in his sketchbook to kill time while he waited. At the moment, he was sketching a picturesque scene of Mount Fuji. Inko suggested that it might be a good idea to bring him over to Nightcrawler because it would cause a lot of issues, so he left Nightcrawler at home and Sebas sat waiting beside him. Sebas watched everyone pass by and examined them all, but he noticed that everyone was staring at Izuku, and he deduced that this was because he was a quirkless person. Since they were staring at his master and he was certain that they might try something if he wasn't present, this infuriated him greatly. Fortunately, a nurse called for him and Izuku, so they didn't have to wait long. They followed her into the back and soon found themselves in a room with Inko seated in a chair. Izuku and Sebas entered together, and Izuku took a seat while Sebas stood aside. Izuku asked, still unsure of what was going on, "So mom, what's going on?" "I talked to Recovery Girl and after hearing what I had to say she agreed to see you and try to figure out your quirk back at UA," Inko replied. "Really? exclaimed Izuku, who was ecstatic to finally meet the recovery girl. Sebas inquired, Master Izuku, do you know her? Not personally, but I do know of her. She's one of the best medics in the whole world, and with her quirk she can heal people of most injuries as long as they aren't something as severe as a missing limb. If I can remember correctly, her quirk works off your stamina in order to heal your body, so if you don't have a lot of stamina then she can't heal you very much or at all, Izuku replied. As he continued to think of something, Sebas stroked his beard thoughtfully and remarked, I see, that would be a very interesting quirk. At that moment, the door opened, and Recovery Girl entered the room before shutting it behind her. Curious, the Recovery Girl asked, so this is your son that you told me activated his quirk after 6 years? Well, yes, but he's actually always had a quirk, but the doctors who saw him didn't know how it worked or how to activate it, so they just labeled him quirkless, Inko replied. Recovery Girl scowled at that. It was regrettably common for doctors to either declare a child quirkless or simply say that the government should handle the situation if they were unsure of how the quirk operated. She muttered something under her breath about kicking government officials in the balls, but no one else heard it except Sebas. Recovery Girl spat out the last line because she detested the law, saying, well, I'm sorry about that. It's a messed up thing, but if a doctor does that then they get a bonus, giving the child will then be labeled an organ donor. Inko scowled at that. She detested it and hoped that perhaps Izuku wouldn't have to go through that kind of thing now that his quirk was finally revealed. Anyway, let's talk about his quirk, Recovery Girl said, pointing to Sebas. I'm going to need to do a brain scan and a blood test on him. Also, who is he? I am Sebas Tien and I am Master Izuku's faithful butler, but as they will tell you I'm his summon, he stated. If you don't mind, I'd like to do a scan on you as well just to see if there's anything to learn from you, she replied. Izuku nodded to Sebas, who said, if my master sees nothing wrong with it then very well. Izuku was the first to undergo a blood test, but Recovery Girl took note of the scars on his arms and mentally noted that she needed to speak with Nezu. Sebas was next, but the needle broke as she attempted to puncture his skin. She then got a different needle, one designed for people with unusual skin conditions, but it broke again, so she was unable to perform a blood test on him. Izuku expressed regret, but she said it was okay and that she would simply need to have a brain scan. An hour later, they were all back in the room, staring at Recovery Girl, who was holding the documents for his CT scan, or brain scan as some people refer to it. So what's going on? Inko asked anxiously. Well, Midoriya here is healthy, though I'd like to do an X-ray soon to see the state of his bones, giving his scars and now some of them seem slightly crooked. But for the brain scan, his brain is very active, she stated while presenting them with the paper. The part of Izuku's brain that controlled his quirk was incredibly active as he stared at it. A significant portion of that area of his brain was covered by the activity size. Before you say anything, he doesn't have any health concerns about it. This just shows that with Izuku's quirk being active his brain is very active, but then again this might also be because this is the first time he's using it and his brain is still trying to adjust, Recovery Girl replied. Inko asked, so my baby is okay? Yes, but I'd like to do some other tests and have him come to UA to train to use his quirk. You don't have to worry about anything. UA is used to helping children with dangerous or different quirks, so we'll make sure Midoriya is safe, replied Recovery Girl. Okay. But I don't know if we can afford it, replied Inko. No need to worry. UA won't charge you for something like this, giving it was the government's fault. The bills will fall onto them for falsely diagnosing Midoriya, Recovery Girl replied. Inko said, thank you. Oh, what about Sebas? Right, well his brain is exactly the same, though the part that controls emotions is more active than normal, but besides that it's a perfectly healthy brain, replied Recovery Girl. Thank you, ma'am, Inko replied. Of course, also I'll have someone call you in a couple of days and set up an appointment for you to come to UA, but besides that you're free to go, replied Recovery Girl. After thanking her, Sebas and the Midoriya family departed. Nezu is going to have a field day with this kid's quirk. God help us all, said Recovery Girl, letting out a sigh as she examined Izuku's documents. After slowly opening his eyes and glancing around his room, Izuku noticed Nightcrawler dozing off on his desk. He then sat up and stretched his back to release any tension. When he heard his door open and Sebas enter, he got out of bed and stretched a few more times. Good morning, Master Izuku. I have prepared your bath for you and breakfast is currently being made, even though I told your mother she didn't have to cook since I'd be more than happy to, Sebas replied. Izuku went to his drawer and took out his clean clothes for the day because he was heading to UA to get help with his quirk. Thank you, Sebas, and that's just the way my mom is. She doesn't always get to cook for me, so whenever she can she always takes the opportunity, he said. Sebas bowed slightly and walked out of the room, saying, "Ah, I see. Well, I'll be sure to remember that for the future. Oh morning, do you want me to open the window for you, so you can fly around?" Izuku asked Nightcrawler as he looked at him after hearing clicks. After hearing a few clicks, he had a gut instinct that confirmed his correctness. He walked over to the window and said, "Okay, I'm opening it." Then he opened it, letting Nightcrawler take off and spread his wings. Before stretching his wings and taking off to explore, he nipped Izuku's finger and clicked its beak to express his love. Izuku couldn't resist grinning, so he went to the bathroom and took a bath. While sitting in the bathtub, he examined some of the burns and scars from years of bullying or lynching attempts. For being quirkless, alone, his back, arms, legs, and chest were all covered in scars. Some were minor burns or cuts, while others were more severe and resulted in numerous broken bones. With a sigh, he leaned back and savored the hot water while contemplating the precise boundaries of his peculiarity. For Sebas, he was a very devoted butler who was skilled in cooking, cleaning, money management, and, he claimed, even hand-to-hand combat. He first called forth Nightcrawler, who he could transform into a coat-like cloak that allowed him to fly. He was curious about his limits, if any, because they were two entirely different summonses. He hoped that Ua could assist him with his quirk. A knock on the door startled Izuku out of his reverie. "Izuku sweetie, breakfast is done and we are waiting on you," Inko said sweetly. Izuku hurriedly finished his bath and changed into black pants and a white long-sleeve shirt to conceal his scars. "Okay mom, I'll be down in just a second," he said. After that, he hurried down and entered the kitchen, where he observed Sebas washing some dishes and Inko already eating. Curious, Izuku asked, "Sebas, didn't you make yourself breakfast?" Sebas said honestly, "Oh, I already ate earlier this morning, so you don't need to worry, Master Izuku." Izuku remarked, "Well, I'm glad or else I'd feel bad." "You don't need to feel bad for me, Master. My job is to be at your service and help you however I can," Sebas replied. Alright, so mom, what time will we be heading to UA to learn more about my quirk?" Izuku replied. Since Inko hoped that Ua would be able to assist her son and hopefully enable him to have a normal life now and be happy, she said cheerfully, "In about an hour, so enjoy your breakfast then get dressed for the day." Izuku nodded and resumed his breakfast in the hopes that his teachers would treat him well and that he might one day make friends. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX its training grounds, and its cities. The stadium for the sports festival was on the opposite side of the campus. I must say this place is quite large. It would be big enough for Master Izuku to call his home, Sebas replied. What I don't need anything that big, why would I need a house that large? Izuku responded. They all claimed to have heard laughter in the distance. What was that? Inko asked, a little alarmed. A weary, deadpan voice said, that would be my sadistic boss who likes to watch humans suffer. They all turned to face the tall, lanky man wearing all black, a gray scarf, and long, disheveled black hair. Given the size of the bags under his eyes, he appeared to be severely sleep-deprived. He gestured to both of them and said, "You're Izuku and Inko Midoriya, correct?" Then he turned to face the butler behind them and the raven perched on Izuku's shoulder, both of whom were giving him a very intense look that practically threatened to hurt him if they did anything to him. He turned around and walked back to the campus, saying, "And you two must be his quirks. All of you follow me to the principal's office." Since he might never have the opportunity to walk down these halls again, Izuku was trying to commit everything he saw to memory as they all followed him around the campus. He noticed some students who were presumably here for after-school activities or other projects, as well as a few teachers passing by. After a few more minutes, they all reached a wooden door with the words, "Principal's Office," and his name underneath. After approaching the door and knocking, Aizawa heard a faint, "Come in," and opened it to reveal a rather large office with 4 couches arranged, 2 on each side of a large wooden table. Bookshelves or photos of past school years that featured the graduates were placed next to the walls. Izuku noticed that Nezu was in each one from the time UA was constructed until now, back in 2078. Nezu sat down at his desk at the rear of the room. He smiled and said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, Principal Nezu." "Ah, you must be Izuku Midoriya." Oh, it's nice to meet you too," he said, bowing respectfully. Nezu confused Izuku on the last two and said, "Haha, no need to do that. What I'm more interested in is your quirk and mental state along with physical. I see your confusion. Recovery girl informed me of your injuries and how most of them have improperly healed, so because of that I had her call in some specialist to heal your injuries. Also I'll be having Hound Dog help your mental state in case there is any problems like depression, suicide or anything of the sorts," Nezu replied. He tried to get Nezu to stop everything he was doing by saying, What, I don't need all of that. We couldn't even begin to pay that all back." "Oh, don't worry about that. The government screwed you over, so they'll be paying every single penny," Nezu laughed darkly, along with compensation. "Wait, but how will the government pay for it? They are scumbags and try to cut corners at every single turn," Inko replied. "The same way you get them to do anything, blackmail the elites and puppets that run the whole system," said Nezu, "especially the victim-playing ones." Sebas nodded in agreement, stating that politicians are scumbags who only care about money and power, according to merit. Looking at him, Inko asked, "So what will we do now?" "First thing I'd like to do is play a game with Midoriya," Nezu replied. "A game?" Izuku asked, perplexed because nobody ever wanted to play games with him and he had so much homework that he couldn't even play the video games his mother got him for Christmas or his birthday, assuming she ever had enough money saved. "Yes, I'd like to play a game of chess with you. I read the information that the schools had about you and it shows your average grade score being less than 10%. Not only that, but it says you're extremely impatient and get angry easily and love to cause trouble at every turn." As another piece of her heart broke, Inko looked down at that. She had done everything she could to help him, including helping him study, but no matter what he or she did, his grades continued to suffer. The worst part was that Izuku would be covered in fresh cuts, burns, and bruises the day after she came to speak with the teachers and other staff members to find out what was wrong. Okay, I don't know how to play. I didn't have a dad to teach me or anyone who wanted to play with me." Izuku was staring down. "Oh, don't worry, I can teach you and I'll also go easy on you the first round," Nezu replied. Izuku abruptly said, "No," as he gazed up at Nezu with resolve in his eyes. "Don't be easy on me. I want to learn how to play no matter how difficult it is." Nezu gave him a look and flashed one of his fangs. This child might become his favorite, and if he's 10, he only needs to wait 5 years to be a recognized student. However, there was nothing stopping him from bringing Midoriya here to be trained and taught by the teachers until he was a student. Nezu then produced a chess board from beneath his desk, set it on the table, and described the pieces, their functions, and how to use them. After that, he gave Izuku a few game-playing strategy suggestions before they both started playing. Izuku made numerous mistakes while playing, but he was still able to steal a few of Nezu's pieces while the others watched. Nezu easily won the game 10 minutes later, but he saw a lot of potential. After Izuku lost 3 pieces, he changed his strategy, allowing Izuku to get a couple of Nezu's pieces. Unfortunately, it was a bit too late, and he lost. "Well, Midoriya, I must say you did a good job. For your first time playing chess you lost a lot of pieces but did take a couple of mine, so for your first time you did well," Nezu replied. In the hopes that the principal would not object to another game, he said, I'd like to play again sometime." Nezu got up and led the others, saying, "Of course, let's find a day sometime in the future for us to play, but first to the gym to see how your quirk works." Wait, what about the doctor that you mentioned earlier?" replied Inko. "Well, since the specialists aren't here to help fix and heal Midoriya's bones, we shall head down into the gym and try to figure out his quirk works, because if we can learn that then we can begin training him," Nezu said. It was going to be a long day, Izawa sighed. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX Nezu asked Izuku as they stood in the gym. Well, I drew very detailed drawings and had some ideas about the powers I wanted the summon to have, but I didn't have complete control. Sebas is a butler, but other than that, I'm not positive. What can you do, Sebas? I can do everything a butler can, and I also have super strength which gives me 4A, the regular strength of a normal human. Also I can use that strength in explosive bursts which is stronger than my normal strength, Sebas replied. Izuku exclaimed, "Wow, that's amazing," which unintentionally caused Sebas to feel a little proud. For Nightcrawler he can fly around obviously, but something else he can do is turn himself into a coat that I can wear which then allows me to fly around. I see. In that case try and make another summon, anything you'd like since it is you who will be creating it, Nezu replied. Izuku nodded his head, though he appeared a little uneasy. He then sat down and drew a stick figure before attempting to conjure a summon with his hand. When a few seconds passed with nothing at all happening, he tried again and again and again. But no matter how many times he tried, it didn't work, and he began to worry that something wasn't right. Aizawa, who knew what was happening, asked, "Midoriya, what are you thinking?" I'm thinking I want this to be summoned," said Izuku. "Okay, but what were you thinking when you summoned the Raven and Sebas?" replied Aizawa. Izuku was about to respond when he stopped to consider it. He tried to call them with all of his heart. First, he wanted a friend, and Nightcrawler arrived. In order to make his mother's life easier, he then wanted someone who could assist around the house. However, at this moment, he wasn't particularly interested in the purpose or mechanism of the summon. "Try something different, try putting your all in and make a summon you really want," Aizawa replied. After giving him a quick glance and nodding his head, Izuku put his hand to his chin and started to consider the type of summon he was truly looking for. He felt terrible as he considered this and considered how much these scars affected him. He couldn't look at one area of his body without seeing a scar. Wait, what if I was to make someone who can heal people? Heal wounds that are even extremely horrible and it doesn't cost the injured stamina do that they can be healed easier. He then started drawing right away, displaying incredible skill throughout. Not a single motion was wasted, and he made no mistakes that needed to be fixed. The other people watched in awe as he drew this. After drawing the desired summons in just 1.5 hours, he slammed his hand back onto the page. Before a huge puff of smoke and everyone else around him appeared, it glowed a very faint yellowish-purple light that gradually brightened after a few moments. A fair-skinned woman with brown eyes and straight blonde hair that parted above her forehead appeared after the smoke had subsided. There was a tiny violet diamond on her forehead, and her hair, which reaches her lower back, is shoulder-length bangs that frame her face. She wore a red skirt that hung just above her knees, a white shirt that showed off a little of her stomach, and her hair in a high ponytail. She had on what appeared to be mesh armor underneath her clothing. She also had a respectably large chest, although Izuku was unaware that he had drawn them that large until she was called upon. As new memories of everything Izuku knew about the world burst into her mind, along with a wealth of medical information she needed to become the world's greatest medic, the woman looked around in confusion. It stopped after a few moments, and she glanced around the room, noticing a bear, a man with long, untidy black hair, a green-haired woman, and a green-haired child. A raven named Nightcrawler followed by a rat dog thing and a butler she knew as Sebas. She raised an eyebrow at the wide-eyed child and asked, "So what's my name?" As her gaze returned to Izuku and she slightly protruded her hip. After stuttering for a few seconds and searching his mind, Izuku looked up into her brown eyes and said, How about Tsunade?" "Tsunade," the woman said, letting the name slip from her lips, then grinned and said, "I like it, master, or should I call you Izuku?" He rubbed the back of his head shyly and said, Either one is fine. Sebas calls me Master Izuku, but I'm okay with either." She laughed before noticing the wounds on his hand. Her mind was then filled with all of Izuku's injuries, both mental and physical, and she felt her blood boil with rage. When Izuku knelt down and took his hand, hers glowed green and hovered over his, causing her to splutter and turn red. Tsunade looked at him sorrowfully before her eyes ironed with resolve and the green haze on his hand brightened. Multiple fractures and broken joints, torn and badly damaged tendons and nerve endings. "From what I can tell, most of the nerves in your hand are almost completely destroyed, making it hard for you to feel anything. Also I see that you have lots of burn damage. And this is only your hand," she said. Aizawa said, mentally noting to check his file, "Midoriya, what is she doing? And how does she know about all your injuries? After that, get Nezu's approval to beat the living daylights out of whoever did this to the child." If only his hand was involved. He was terrified to hear about the rest of his wounds. "I'm a medic. When Izuku created me, my mind was flooded with knowledge on almost every medical field and how to heal almost every single injury. Now for this," she said while pointing to her glowing hands, "this is. I guess I'll call it Healing Hands technique. It allows me to concentrate and send some of my stamina to my hands, then use it to heal all but the most grievous of injuries. When Nezu began to laugh, everyone was taken aback by Izuku's ability to call forth someone of this caliber. The possibilities were endless as a vicious smile appeared on his face, revealing his teeth. Okay, I have to ask this. Midoriya, why did you make her chest that large? Seems pretty perverted, Aizawa replied. Tsunade got up and cracked her knuckles as a tick mark appeared on her forehead. She said, "Why are you staring at my chest, huh?" As she approached him, creating a menacing aura and spider web cracks with every step. Then Tsunade punched him, sending him flying across the gym and slamming into the wall. And now wait, I was just making an observation he said, interrupted. Nezu ate some popcorn and remarked, "Well, that was quite entertaining." Inko remarked, "I thought it was violent." Nezu simply burst out laughing. Everyone was still in awe of Tsunade's ability to effortlessly treat all of Izuku's wounds, with the exception of the most severe ones, after she returned to him and continued to do so. The majority of those were either scars and severely damaged nerves or bones that healed improperly. For the next hour, she kept healing him, and when Recovery Girl arrived, she was astounded by Tsunade's skill. She made it seem like child's play to treat practically all of Izuku's wounds. Tsunade then discussed with Recovery Girl the necessity of seeing a doctor or fixing the improperly healed bones herself. Curious about her strength, Nezu asked her to bunch a concrete pillar that had been put up with a button push. It's safe to assume that the concrete pillar that had given her incredible strength vanished after she punched it. After a few hours, for the remainder of the day, they carried on with the tests, evaluating their summon skills, their distance from Izuku, their reaction to his danger, and their stamina to determine how long they could work before becoming fatigued and whether it had any effect on Izuku. They went as far as 7 miles before they reached the end of the UA border, but amazingly, neither distance nor stamina affected them in the slightest. The staff also discovered that the summons had a reasonable understanding of Izuku's memories and emotional state at all times. Izuku turned to Nezu and asked, "So how were the tests?" "You did amazingly well for your first day of training. Once we get an even better grasp of your quirk and also begin training your body, then you shall become an amazing hero," Nezu said. "What about school?" I want Izuku to keep going to school. But not Aldera Junior High. I can't take seeing my baby get hurt anymore," Inko replied. Nezu laughed. "Well, we can go one of two routes. The first could be that he simply attends here and the staff help teach him, or we find another school where he can get a fresh start in life. Though the choice is up to Midoriya since it is his life. See, could I get a day or two to think this over?" "I'm not really sure." Izuku scratched the back of his head while considering the situation. Nezu's dark chuckle made everyone shudder in fear that the doctor who diagnosed you quirkless in your school will suffer greatly. "Why, of course, and also don't worry about your old job or having to pay the quirkless tax anymore," Nezu said. Everyone nearly felt sorry for the people as they watched Nezu start laughing uncontrollably. Izuku, 12, was sitting in his new home, which his mother had purchased with the help of a summons he made, who was financially savvy, after his mother had mentioned to Sebas one evening that she was in debt. After learning that he had made a summons to help make money, he fled without even waiting for a name, yelling about making his master money and, well. Rewind to 2 years ago. When Izuku heard his mother scream, he leapt from his bed and ran down the hallway, Nightcrawler trailing behind him. When he got to the kitchen, he noticed his mother wide-eyed as she looked at a letter from the bank. Izuku asked, hoping his mother was okay, "Mom, what's wrong?" Inko pointed to the bank account and said, Honey, look at this." Only 2 weeks had passed since that one summon left, and Izuku had never seen so much money in his life. When he walked over and looked, his jaw dropped to the ground. $2,829,480,000 yen. $20 million. Unable to figure out what to do with this kind of money, Inko said, Honey, what do we do with this?" Sebas said as he entered the room, "I think it would be a good idea to buy a home befitting of Master Midoriya." "What kind of home were you thinking?" "I mean, yes, this apartment is kinda small, but it's still homey," Inko replied. With a straight face, Sebas stated, a castle or a mansion would be the only setting that would work for Master Midoriya. Both Midoriyas screamed, "What?" The guest room was where Tsunade screamed, "Keep quiet, I have a hangover." Flashback over. Sebas essentially coerced Inko into purchasing a mansion. Naturally, she chose a modest one because, As she stated, she didn't require anything too large. However, the smallest one she could locate had 25 bedrooms, which Nezu suggested and which was oddly close to Ua, especially considering that its yard was 20 acres. In Japan, which is ridiculously costly, but they received a fantastic bargain. Thanks again to Nezu. He sighed again, got up, and started to dress when he heard someone knock on the door. A woman's voice said, "Master Midoriya, are you awake? If so, we can help dress you. Why did Sebas and Nezu convince me to summon a bunch of maids and even a cook? Wait, I also remember Sebas saying something about battle maids." Izuku was thinking. He understood Sebas. However, Nezu worried him because he didn't know what was going through that rat's mind. Izuku was still extremely embarrassed every time they attempted to dress him, but he said, "I'm awake and don't worry, I can dress myself." Or manage to dress him, particularly since they would always remark on how attractive he was, despite all of his scars. Fifth led the other maids into the room and declared, "You are our master, Master Izuku, and it is our responsibility to dress you." Fifth is a young lady with beige hair that reaches her neck. She wears a maid uniform, has 2 bangs on either side of her head, and has dull ruby eyes. Izuku simply said, okay, in acceptance. Before they started to undress him, they all grinned and took his clothes out of his drawers and laid them on the bed. Sixus smiled as she took off his shirt and said, "Your mom is waiting for you in the dining room, even though the cook and Sebas offered to make your breakfast." Sixus is a young lady with golden eyes and long golden hair. Like the other 6 maids that Izuku created and named, she dons a maid uniform. Izuku, still agitated because he was only wearing his underwear and all of his scars were visible to the maids, said, "I see, thank you for letting me know." It's still difficult to move past years of abuse, even though he can sense their feelings and feels that they don't judge him. Along with the other maids, Fifth had a dejected expression on her face as they all sensed Izuku's insecurities and pain from all of his wounds. After just one more minute, he was completely decked out in a black t-shirt, shorts, and a tracksuit that covered them all to conceal all of his scars. He discussed his scars with Tsunade, but she informed him that skin grafts were the only option and that he was too young for them. Despite her best efforts, she was unable to get rid of the number brand that was on his head. To ensure its permanence, it was permanently inked into the bone. Izuku could still picture his mother's anguished expression as she sat there and listened to him scream in agony while having that tattoo placed on his head. As a result, he made the decision to grow out his hair, which his mother approved of because he explained that he wanted to cover up the tattoo to prevent people from assuming he was strange. As she and the other 6 maids took a step back, Sixus finished his ponytail and grinned, saying, "All done, master." Izuku said, "Thank you," as he walked from his room to the dining room to have breakfast with his mother. As he kept walking, he reflected on how much had changed and how some UA staff members had ended up homeschooling him, which they didn't mind at all. His former middle school was closed, and all of the teachers were arrested. Their average prison sentences were 25 years, with the possibility of release after 15 years. For the pupils, they were placed in juvenile detention facilities until they turned 18, after which they would be sentenced to 15 years in prison. Additionally, none of them were allowed to attend any hero schools in Japan or the rest of the world. And lastly, Katsuki, when he was old enough, he was permitted to attend UA, but there would be a lot of restrictions. He must attend therapy 4 times a week, refrain from treating others cruelly, and complete 5,000 hours of community service. In addition, he must wear a Quirk bracelet at all times. He will only receive one warning, which is that he will be turned over to the police if he does anything inappropriate, threatens someone, or does anything else of that nature. He will then receive the same punishment as the other students, but he will be required to wear the Quirk bracelet until the day he passes away. Given the number of crimes he committed a euro, from torture to suicide baiting and using your Quirk on someone a euro, this is justified. Tsukauchi made sure to bring up the fact that Katsuki Bakugo was viewed as a villain by the law. He will always be haunted by the fact that he was a villain. After all of this, Mitsuki kept attempting to call Inko to apologize, but she ignored him, and Izuku did feel bad for his mother. Given how her son treated Izuku for 6 years of his life, Mitsuki couldn't really blame her. However, the most depressing aspect of all of this, Izuku's quirk was the only reason they were able to arrest everyone, otherwise, the government would have ignored him. With a, "Good morning sweetie," greeting, Inko drew Izuku out of his reverie. He sat down in his chair and said, "Good morning, Mom." I made you a big breakfast of eggs and rice with some cut-up fruit for you, so you can go for your daily run with plenty of energy, Inko grinned broadly. Instead of working double shifts every day to barely put food on the table, she is able to spend a lot of time with him because of that one summon who brought them so much money. Thank you, Mom, I really appreciate it. I'm hoping to increase my distance today and run even farther than before, Izuku replied. Inko remarked, but you've already run so far. I know, but given I'm training to be a hero, I need to get stronger and work on my stamina so can fight for long periods of time, and if my summons don't have time to eat, Izuku replied. Izuku also discovered during the testing that his summons must eat in order to maintain their stamina to remain and carry out tasks. In order to prepare all of the food, they made sure the house had a huge refrigerator and a stove with an oven. I know that, honey, but still doesn't mean I can't worry, replied Inko. Now when are you going to get a girlfriend? Mom, what? I'm 12, I'm too young for that and I have 3.5 years until UA. Izuku replied. Inko grinned and said, I want to be a grandma so I can spoil grandbabies, so it doesn't mean I can't hope. A white-haired infant with bronze horns and red eyes, no more than 2 or 3 years old, sneezed in a dark subterranean base. After hearing the sneeze, Overhaul gave his men orders to thoroughly clean the base and quarantine it for 2 weeks in order to ensure that the source of the sneeze had been eliminated. Upon returning to Izuku, he experienced an abrupt surge of paternal instincts as a mental picture of the same child appeared. He returned to his breakfast after shaking his head. I'm just teasing right now, though in the future I hope you give me plenty of grandbabies to spoil, but till then, you're enough for me, replied Inko. Alright, Izuku said. As this was going on, the maids and even Tsunade looked up around the room, thinking that perhaps he would be older. Tsunade spoke for the first time when she asked, So Izuku, how have your bones been feeling since we finally finished healing them? Good, just a slight ache, besides that they don't hurt at all, Izuku replied. Tsunade smiled warmly and said, That's good to hear. Let me know if it hurts at all so I can heal it. Looking at her, Inko asked, So Tsunade, do you have any important surgeries at the hospital? Yes, I do. I have to heal someone's spine that got broken during a villain attack, when a boulder fell and smashed into him, replied Tsunade. She smiled and said, Oh, I hope he does okay, but I know he will in your safe hands. Tsunade grinned at that. She did take pleasure in curing others. Since even doctors cannot use their quirks without a license, she was able to obtain a job at a hospital and a special license to heal people, which was another thing that happened over the past 2 years thanks to Recovery Girl and Nezu. Inko pulled Izuku out of his reverie and said, Please eat your breakfast before it gets cold. Izuku returned to his breakfast, relishing his mother's cooking above all else, and said, I'll be sure to do that. He always enjoyed his mother's cooking. In order to please him, they all glanced at him when he was summoned and mentally noted that they needed to learn how to prepare breakfast the same way Inko does. Particularly Tsunade, who noticed the little notepad with the words, Inko's recipes, written on it when she was looking into her bag. Izuku was sweating from exhaustion from pushing himself this hard, and he soon reached the park that was his goal for the day while running down the road while listening to music on his earbuds. The park was nearly 23 miles from his house. He walked slowly to a bench he saw in the distance, then sagged down to try to catch his breath. He told his summons that he was fine on his own, so he said, Hee hee. I beat my record by 3 miles, but man, my lungs and legs hurt. Since they could have prevented it and didn't want to take any chances of him getting hurt, it did take a lot of persuasion. After a few minutes of sitting on the bench to catch his breath, he got back up and started to move. Izuku saw someone before he had gone very far. She was a girl with fair skin and a very attractive face. She resembles a cat in that she has yellow eyes that tilt inward and thin irises that resemble slits. Her bangs covered her forehead, and her pale ash blonde hair was down and slightly past her shoulders. She wore a black knotted sweatshirt, black leggings, and a black and red checkered skirt while she sat next to a tree. Having to remain normal, to avoid her parents' wrath, Himiko exhaled again under control. However, it was really difficult for her, particularly after witnessing her classmates bleeding. She had to suppress those feelings or risk being punished for being a freak, even though they were so lovely and red. As Himiko continued to calm herself after seeing blood earlier, she thought to herself, why did I have to get a quirk like this, It's caused me nothing but pain. A timid voice said, hello. She opened her eyes to see a boy standing in front of her who might have been a year younger than her. With the exception of his bangs, which framed his face, his long forest green hair was pulled back in a ponytail while he wore a tracksuit. Yes, she inquired, perplexed as to why he would speak to her at random. Izuku looked at her worriedly and said, I'm sorry to bother you, but are you okay? You look kind of down. To be honest, Himiko was shocked. She was still wearing her mask to look content and normal. However, this child saw right through it when he met her. She looked down and said, I'm okay, don't need to worry about me. In an attempt to assist her, Izuku said, well, it's not my place to pry, so I won't, but if you'd like I can sit next to you and at least keep you company. She thought that sounded really lovely, and before she knew it, she gave the bench beside her a gentle pat. After receiving the signal, he took a seat beside her, keeping a safe distance between them, and they sat in silence for what seemed like an eternity. After a while, Himiko broke the silence by asking, so what's your name? He said, Izuku Midoriya. What about you? As he cheered to himself that he could now speak to girls without stuttering nearly as much as he used to after speaking with Tsunade and the maid. Curious, she said, Himiko Toga, so what made you want to talk to me? He said, lightly scratching his cheek, well, you seem sad and it's a hero's job to help everyone in need and you looked like you needed someone to talk to. She gave him a slightly different look. He was only acting in this way to assist her and for no other reason. She began to giggle before she realized it, opening her mouth wide enough for Izuku to see her long canines. Izuku exclaimed with excitement, wow, is that part of your quirk? Despite his lifelong study of quirks, he had never seen one that did that. Himiko gasped and quickly covered her mouth as she turned away, fearing that he would despise that she and judge her like her parents did. Before noticing that she appeared afraid, Izuku said, that's so cool, what can your quirk do? Are you okay? Was it something I said? He asked, his eyes gleaming with joy. With her mouth still shut, she turned to face him and asked, why you don't think I'm a freak? Izuku nodded. I don't think you are, from what I've seen, you're a nice girl with a really cool quirk I'd love to learn about. After closely observing him for any indications of dishonesty, she slowly lowered her hand and, for the first time in a very long time, she flashed her teeth in a genuine smile. She said, thank you Midoriya. I appreciate it, with joy because he enjoyed her dogs. He might be a friend who wouldn't criticize her or insist that she be normal. So if you don't mind me asking, what's your quirk? Replied Izuku. As she contemplated telling him, Himiko's mouth thinned into a thin line. He was kind, but she was still concerned about his response. She chose to take a chance and tell him about her quirk after re-examining him and seeing nothing but excitement. My quirk is called Transform. It lets me transform into a physical lookalike of another individual, as well as copy their voice. I can only transform into people whose blood I've ingested. That's all I know about it since I only got to test it one time. She continued. She slowly turned to face Izuku, anticipating a disgusted expression and his declaration that she wasn't normal. Instead, she was greeted with a broad smile and wide eyes. That's so cool Toga-san. I mean to be able to transform into someone by drinking that person's blood. You can be an espionage hero and sneak into villain bases to take them down from the inside, Izuku replied. But that's just depends on how long your transformation can last. If it can last a long time then it'd. Toga, are you okay? She attempted, but was unable, to stop her tears. Her parents had hammered home to her that her quirk was evil, but for the first time in her life, someone didn't care. A pair of arms encircled him before he could continue, Himiko's face buried in the bend of his neck as she released her anguish and tears. Sobbing intermittently, she said, thank you Midoriya. This caused Izuku to flush, but he was able to relax enough to put his arms around her and give her a gentle back rub, just like his mother used to tell him, it's okay, Toga, you can let it all out. I'm here. She nodded her head and smiled, despite the fact that it sounded cheesy. Himiko decided to ask a question that had been on her mind for a while after they had been talking and getting to know each other for a little while. Gazing at her new acquaintance, she inquired, so Midoriya, what's your quirk? Well, it's kinda hard to explain since it doesn't sound like something you'd think could exist, he replied. She tilted her head to the side and asked, what ya mean? Well, I think it'd be better if I was to show you. But Could you come to my house since I don't really feel like being arrested for using my quirk in public, Izuku replied. She cheerfully replied, yeah sure. Her parents and siblings despised her for her eccentricity, so she was all for spending less time with them. Her own room was her only haven. He closed his eyes and sent a mental message to Izuku, who replied, okay, I'll call Sebas and he'll come pick us up. He promised to be there as soon as he could with a car. With some confusion, Himiko asked, why? Couldn't we just walk to your house? No. My house is about 23 miles away, so that isn't really an option, Izuku replied. 23 miles. Then how did you get here and why are you all the way out here? Replied Himiko. I was going for a run to help increase my stamina to help me when I become a hero, Izuku said. She exclaimed, whoa, that's still far. After a while of conversation, a car arrived at the park, and Sebas got out and started to walk in the direction of Izuku. Ha ha ha, yeah, I saw that video of All Might when that happened, it was so funny to watch, Himiko said with a giggle. It was really funny watching that lady scream so much that she actually slapped him, Izuku replied. Sebas approached him and bowed slightly, saying, ah Master Midoriya. Oh, and I presume this is your friend? Sebas asked. Izuku, feeling a little ashamed, said, yes, she is Sebas. Could you take us to my house so I can show her my quirk and other stuff? Of course, sir, follow me, Sebas said, taking the lead. Why you have a butler? Himiko asked, staring at him in disbelief. Izuku, who appeared even more ashamed, assured her that he would explain everything when they visited his home. She exclaimed in admiration of the mansion, it's so big. Yeah. We had to get a bigger house and this one was for sale and my mom was able to buy it, Izuku replied. After that, they entered the mansion and were welcomed by Inko and the maids. As Inko approached them, she said, welcome back honey, and who is this? This is my new friend Himiko Toga. Toga, this is my mom, Izuku replied. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Midoriya, Himiko said, bowing slightly in deference to her new friend's mother. Oh please just call me Inko and my aren't you just the cutest, she said as she gazed upon the blushing girl. Izuku, I know I told you to get a girlfriend but I didn't think you'd get one so pretty and this soon. A red-faced Izuku, dying of embarrassment, exclaimed, Mom, she's my friend. And we are too young. Himiko laughed at the two Midoriyas and blushed healthily. They were pleasant, even though she had only recently met them. Okay Izuku, I'm done teasing you and your friend, so what are you gonna do? She inquired. Izuku grinned and said, I'm going to show her my quirk. Listen Toga, Izuku's quirk is very powerful and bad people would stop at nothing to get it. Can you please promise us not to tell anyone? Inko said after a brief moment of hesitation, then turned to face Himiko. He didn't judge me for my quirk, so I promise I won't tell anyone unless he wants me to, Himiko said, looking a little perplexed but nodding her head at Izuku before turning back to Inko. Okay, just making sure. Now you two get going and make sure you're safe and play afterwards, you're still kids and should have fun, Inko said, smiling and nodding her head after a brief moment of staring at her. They both gave a nod, and Izuku escorted Himiko to the mansion's gym. She was amazed by the location as they were walking, but then she saw Izuku open a door to a spacious room filled with weight training equipment and other similar items. Wow, she exclaimed, hee yeah. We ended up getting a bunch of stuff to help me gain muscle for when I become a hero, Izuku replied. So why is your quirk so powerful that villains would want to capture you, replied Himiko. My quirk is called Summon. It lets me draw anyone or living creatures and then I can summon it and it'll come to life and serve me. All those people you saw except my mom were all my summons, he said, letting out a sigh as he sat down on the ground and examined her. That can't be true, no quirk could be that strong. Himiko replied. With a small laugh, he took out his sketchbook and said, I'd recommend sitting down and I'll show you. He started drawing and chose to create Himiko, a blood drinker, to help her feel less alone. She sat down, still a little doubtful, and nodded her head. After an hour, he finished drawing and focused on the paper with his hand. Before a cloud of smoke formed and Izuku moved aside to stand beside Himiko, it glowed a faint purple. His new summon emerged after the smoke had subsided, revealing herself. The now-named Power struck a dramatic pose and exclaimed, all right on your knees mortal scum, including you Blondie, you stand in the presence of power. She is a long-haired, unclean blonde woman. She has light red horns sticking out from the top of her head, sharp teeth with distinct fangs, and red and yellow eyes that form a cross. While Himiko and Izuku gazed at her expressionlessly, Izuku had a straightforward idea. He asked himself, is my summons just going to be a mixed bag? She pointed to him and exclaimed, you, master, give me some of your blood so I may show everyone how powerful power is. Why? Are things getting weirder? Izuku and Himiko became close friends very quickly after Izuku summoned power 3 years ago, but with power. Given her behavior, which at times became so bad that Izuku had to yell at her, it was a little more challenging. Rewind. After a week of meeting Himiko and calling forth power, Izuku's boundless patience was finally wearing thin due to power's behavior. Gah, disgusting vegetables, be gone. She snatched them out of her curry and threw them all over the room, which greatly infuriated Inko, who prepared that curry, and his summons, who kept everything tidy. Izuku was even more incensed because his mother put a lot of effort into that, and she isn't treating her with any respect. As one of the maids cleared away the mess she had created, Sebas yelled at her, power, cease this immediately. Since Ms. Midoriya had come over earlier, Himiko said, I agree, power, please stop. She made us this food, so we should show her some respect. Since no one judged her and everyone treated her like a real human, she really preferred to stay here. However, she still lacks the confidence to ask Izuku if he can help her quench her thirst. For her, power did what she saw him do. Given how frequently her family beat her up, it was much more difficult to get back to normal. A bunch of Himiko's meat was taken out of her curry by Power, who exclaimed, no. I won't eat those disgusting vegetables. Hey, that's enough, Ms. Power, exclaimed Sebas. Power honey, please stop and just eat your own food, I'll make sure to put extra meat into your curry for now on, said Inko. Power yelled, I only eat meat, you filthy humans. When Izuku's temper finally got the better of him, he slammed his hands on the table and got to his feet, scowling at Power. He shouted, Power, at her. All of the summons froze, and the room instantly fell silent. To Himiko and Inko, it sounded as though he had yelled at her. Except for his call, it had a totally different sound. The summons heard the growl, Power, and felt every atom in their bodies shriek for them to bow before him. It was as though God himself had called out to them, confirming that Izuku was the one who created them. Power started to shake, her whole body locked up, and she was genuinely afraid. She looked down, sweat trickling down her face. Izuku wasn't the only one who shouted at her. Her master was the one. An inventor. She squeaked, why yes master, as she looked at the floor, too afraid to look up at him. He tried to calm himself by saying, stop being rude and show some respect. I understood. She said, still afraid of what he would do, I understand master, it won't happen again. He sighed and said, good, before looking up, at which point all of his summons stiffened. They all shouted, we'll do better master, out of fear of catching his wrath as well. Izuku was perplexed by this but chose to remain silent because he was too worn out from Power's actions over the past week. End of flashback. Izuku laughed a little at the recollection. He then asked Sebas why they were all afraid of him simply shouting, and he replied that it felt entirely different to them. Every atom in them seemed to be screaming in fear of drawing Izuku's wrath upon them, and it seemed as though God himself was shouting at them. Fortunately, his yelling at her helped calm her down because she is now much nicer and her ego isn't as large as it was. Even though it's still large, she can now at least cover it when necessary. Himiko yelled, Izu, and ran towards him, essentially tackling him from behind and giving him a tight hug. I missed you, she said, her long hair framing her face because she had it down, indicating that Inko had told her that Izuku preferred it that way. Izuku, who blushed a little at Himiko's beauty with her hair down, remarked, I was only gone for 2 days, Himiko, besides you had Power and the others to keep you company. She gave him a whiny, I know but still, before turning to face him. Hey see could I, she said, pointing to his neck with a blush of mild embarrassment. Go ahead, Himiko, Izuku said, grinning and adjusting his collar to reveal his neck. She leaned down, sunk her teeth into his neck, and started drinking his blood while grinning warmly and enjoying the close contact because it allowed her to give him an even stronger hug. Because Izuku was close to the UA staff, she was able to sample a few other people's blood, but his blood was far superior to anything else she had ever tasted. She couldn't help but groan. His blood just tasted so good, to her it was a sweet taste with an irony texture. After a few seconds, she stopped drinking his blood and used her tongue to lick away any remaining blood. Her saliva also helped to stop the bleeding, so it had several uses. She said, "Thank you, Izu," with joy as she held him. She, like Izuku, is very touch-starved, so she loves holding him. It also helps that she has feelings for him and hopes to be with him someday. Anyway, Himiko, are you prepared for the UA entrance exam in 2 days as well? He looked at her as he spoke. Well, after I graduate, hopefully, I'll give it my all. I'll be able to move in with you once the paperwork is finalized, Himiko remarked. Another thing that has occurred in the past few years is that Izuku was finally told about her life when she lost it and attacked him, consuming his blood in a fit of rage. She panicked when she realized what she had done and attempted to flee, but he stopped her and simply held her while she screamed for him to release her. Izuku stayed with her, helped her, and even gave her his blood because she didn't want the monster that was her to harm her only friend. When Power made a dramatic entrance and kicked open the door, Himiko was startled out of her reverie. Master, don't worry Euro, Power is on the way, she shouted as she struck a pose. I'm glad you're here, Power, Izuku remarked, without you, I don't know what I would have done. Of course, ha 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 ha, when is the test so we can demonstrate our strength to the vile mortals? She uttered those words. Izuku said, it's in 2 days, Power, and for that day it's gonna be you and Nightcrawler who come with me, since you two are my most combat-oriented summons. He was aware that while a good portion of his summons were useful for combat, Power's only strength was fighting, and Nightcrawler assisted him in doing so. How about the 6 new maids you were summoned by Sebas? Alpha, Omega, Delta, Beta, Gamma, Zeta, and Epsilon, Himiko said. They are all good at combat but their job is to protect the mansion and my mom, Izuku replied. Sebas finally mentioned the 6 combat maids he had been mentioning for some time, and they had intriguing personalities. With her chest raised high, she remarked, ha ha ha, they might be good, but I Power 'em better. Izuku simply sighed, he couldn't stand Power's antics today. With a, Master Izuku lunch is ready, statement, Yuri Alpha opened the door for them. Wearing glasses and a blue collar around her neck, Yuri Alpha is a smart-looking beauty with her hair tied in a low-cropped bun at the back of her head. Her dress, which lacks a metal plate in front of her skirt, emphasizes mobility over defense. He smiled warmly and said, thank you, Yuri. We will be down in a moment. I will make sure we keep the food warm for you, she said with a slight bow and a wider smile. Another voice that sounded like Lupus Regina Beta said, "Ah no fair Yuri Alpha, I said I wanted to tell him today." As she shut the door, Yuri said, "Pardon me for a moment." A loud smack was heard by all, and Lupus Regina began to sob. "Izu, if I didn't know it I'd say your Quirk likes to give your summons interesting personalities," replied Himiko. "It really does feel that way. Izuku, Himiko, Nightcrawler, and Power were standing in front of Ua. Power was told to follow Izuku around and do as he says, and that since she was a part of his Quirk, she would not be required to take any of the tests. He was also informed that he would need to pass the practical exam with at least 120 points because his Quirk is sentient and capable of fighting on its own. Tsunade kissed his forehead for good luck before she left for work, but no one mentioned it until Power pointed it out while Himiko merely scowled at it. With Izuku, he also eventually succeeded in wiping the lipstick mark off his forehead. While cleaning it on the ride, he was unaware that Himiko was staring at him with jealousy on her face. Power was unconcerned, and Nightcrawler simply sat proudly on his shoulder, surveying the other people in their immediate vicinity and making sure none of them posed a threat to his master. This location is, he couldn't believe what he was seeing when he saw Katsuki enter the building from a distance, wearing a bracelet and a big frown. His mind conjured up hundreds, if not thousands, of memories of Katsuki and all of his summons that he was unaware of. They were furious. Well, Izuku began to walk when he noticed someone tripping, so he hurried forward and grabbed her arm to stop her. "Come on girls, let's go inside. We only have 5 minutes before the test starts," he said. Ochako was extremely anxious about being accepted to UA and the fact that her parents had paid so much for her to attend. She needed to prove herself to them and succeed in this school so she could be a hero and provide them with financial support so they could finally live a comfortable life. She took a deep breath and started to move forward, trying to keep a smile on her face to boost her confidence. However, she stumbled over the uneven tile as she was moving. This is how I begin my quest to become a hero. Falling and tripping. I apologize, Daddy and Mommy. Accepting her fate, she thought, I should have done better, but was stopped when she felt someone grab her arm. How are you? A voice said. Her attention was immediately drawn to the scar on his face and hands, as well as something that his hair was hiding on his temple, which she couldn't see clearly because of his hair. She turned her head and saw a cute but handsome teen who was either her age or slightly older, with curly dark green hair, forest green eyes, and a cute line of freckles on his cheeks. I miss you, okay? Izuku asked again, a little worried. Ochako shook her head rapidly and got to her feet, saying, I apologize for that, I was absorbed in my thoughts. Thank you for saving me, too. She remarked, I really didn't want to trip to start my day. It's okay, don't worry. Izuku Midoriya is my name, and I must admit that I'm also quite anxious, he said. She smiled warmly and said, Ochako Uraraka, before noticing the other two. And you two are. Himiko Toga, I am the mighty and mighty power. Now bow down as if you were smack. Izuku, who had learned this trick from Yuri Alpha, quickly slapped Power in the back of the head because it kept Beta and Power in check. Unsure of how to react, she said, oh well, it's nice to meet you too. Pardon her, Izuku remarked irritably, she's like this and this is one of the few ways to keep her tamed. It's not, okay, when Power gets excited, she can be so awful, Himiko said. Nightcrawler simply cawed at Power after glancing at her. You foolish bird, I don't. Power shouted to him. Oh, you have a bird, but why? Ochako said. Well, whatever, he said, he's a part of my quirk. Whoa, that's awesome, I've never seen a sentient quirk in my life, Ochako said. The bell alerting them to their 5 remaining minutes interrupted them before they could proceed. I apologize, but we have to get to the tests quickly. Ochako nodded and hurried to the test room after saying this. 3 hours later, Izuku, Himiko, and Power were waiting in the auditorium for the instructions for the next section of the tests. In order to kill time and relax, Izuku was drawing in his sketchbook. At the moment, he was creating a fox head with several eyes on its head, which, to be honest, looked a little eerie. Present Mike only had to wait a few more minutes before he took the stage and started outlining the rules and everything else. Izuku was still drawing and only partially listening because Nezu had already explained all of this to him when he explained why he needed to receive so many points, while Himiko listened while Power simply dozed off. Izuku looked into Nezu's soulless black eyes and felt uneasy when he asked why, especially when Nezu laughed. His straightforward answer was, because it's more fun to watch and it's entertaining watching humans try and fail, before he burst out laughing once more. He mused to himself, Nezu is frightful and extremely skilled at sadism. And the green-haired one. A voice shouted, drawing Izuku's attention. You haven't been paying attention this whole time, you have had your face in your notebook during the speech, which is very distracting. He said, looking up to see a tall teen with dark blue hair and glasses. He was standing straight and pointing at Izuku before he started doing hand chops. Leave if you are unable to pay attention. The teenager yelled. Thanks to years of being surrounded by confident people and his encouragement from Mom, Himiko, and the UA staff, Izuku's eyes narrowed a little. He has a lot of confidence and felt more irritated than anything else with this teenager. However, someone interrupted him before he could say anything, saying, so what? A pink-skinned girl with pink hair and yellow horns said, he was going about his own business when you interrupted Present Mike as he was explaining to robots. Therefore, you are the one who was distracting others here. Izuku was appreciative of the girl and wrote down that he would thank her if he ever saw her again. He simply sat down with his head down in embarrassment for the boy with the blue hair. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the 4th robot offers opportunities but is more of a barrier and won't award you any points. Let's now apply Plus Ultra, our school motto. Ultra Plus. With Power beside him, Izuku stood in front of one of the city gates. After doing a few quick stretches, he reached up and scratched Nightcrawler's chin, causing him to croon with joy. Then he reached for his support item and examined the container containing the blood. Over the years of training, he learned something else that his quirk enabled him to do. Only one power at a time was available to him through his summons. For Sebas, it was his explosive strength. For Tsunade, it was her healing hands, and for power, it was, to a certain extent, blood manipulation using his own blood. It took him months to learn this, especially since he could only control small amounts of power's blood and had to learn all of his other summons abilities in order to use them. Additionally, the ability he received from the summon was entirely random among all of their strengths or abilities. Ochako and that girl with the pink skin were the first two individuals Izuku recognized when he looked around. "Hey Power, I'll be right back, if not then you know what you have to do as soon as the gates open, destroy as many robots as possible," he said while waving to her. "It's going to be a bloodbath, and I'll demonstrate the power of all these modals." She laughed and yelled. Izuku simply sighed. No matter how many times he tried to soothe her, she would always act in this manner. As he was leaving, he started to go over to Ochako, who was stretching with the girl with the pink skin, who was also helping her. However, before he could reach them, someone put a hand on his shoulder and stopped him. "If you intend to interrupt them, stop. They are obviously preparing for the test, so there's no need to divert their attention. Additionally, despite the fact that we are all separated and do not collaborate, the blonde girl with the horns was seated next to you and is still in this city." He was about to continue when Izuku noticed the doors open and he simply fled from him into the city where he had already witnessed power fighting. "It is obvious that you broke the rules or that UA hasn't done its job. For that, I will report you to the higher-ups. Additionally, I see that you brought a pet, which is also against the rules." As he ran past her and continued into the city, he could just make out Present Mike telling the teenagers to get going and that there was no countdown to real life. He saw several one-pointers around the corner as he ran down another street. As soon as they saw him, they all ran toward Izuku, who opened the capsule, extracted the blood, and transformed it into a crude-looking katana. When they attempted to shoot, he dove down and stabbed one of the robots in the head with the blade after running up to them and sending a mental signal to Nightcrawler, who transformed into a coat-like form and lifted him off the ground so he was flying. It started to short-circuit before shutting off, and Izuku had already moved on to the second one, swiftly chopping off its arm before he intervened and spinning the sword into the robot's open socket where the arm had been. After destroying the second robot, he proceeded to the third, flying over it and swiftly chopping off its head before it could raise its arm gun sufficiently. With a sigh of relief, he looked up and started to run after spotting more robots in the distance. As she watched the candidates battle the robots, Aizawa remarked icily, "This year's lot is pretty decent while the rest are worthless." "You know what we are looking for, Aizawa, besides the test only just started for these cuties," replied Midnight. "I acknowledge that some people are doing better than others." 13 pointed to a monitor showing Katsuki ruthlessly destroying robots and deliberately stealing points from other candidates, saying, "But I wish he wasn't participating considering what he did. We were asked to allow him to enter UA and we shall let him, but he knows the rules and will be reminded of them if he gets the letter sent to him," Nezu said while eating popcorn. A deathly thin man with long golden blonde hair was watching the fights in the background, avoiding eye contact with anyone he thought should inherit one for all. "Oh, it seems Midoriya has gotten much better," Nezu replied. The man started to watch the child fight after Nezu pointed out the monitor, and he was doing well until he noticed something that caused him to turn pale and develop a lump in his throat. Before using Sebas's explosive strength to punch off the head of a robot that was about to attack another student, Izuku retracted the blood to his container and fell to the ground. Then, using the Baral Gamma's lightning, which was much weaker than hers, he turned and stunned the two three-pointers, allowing him to get close and use the blood sword once more to destroy them. He instinctively grabbed his side, thinking in terror, It can't be. If what he's thinking is accurate, he'll need to watch this teenager closely." Nezu reached for the button and said, "Well, I think it's time to release the 0-pointer. However, he chose to wait until the timer reached the 5-minute mark, which was just 1 minute away, adding that, "Besides, this will make it more entertaining for the readers." "Who are the readers?" Aizawa said, perplexed. "Don't worry about it, just know I updated it since someone paid me to," Nezu replied. "What on earth or why?" Change of scene. Midnight said before Nezu interrupted her. After destroying another robot, he now had 42 points with Izuku. He also had a mental connection with power, and after teaching her math for 5 months, he saw that she had between 70 and 90 points, which meant he had achieved Nezus's objective. Before he resumed fighting, he witnessed the pink-skinned girl use what appeared to be acid that was thrown from her hands to destroy a two-pointer. She celebrated by destroying more, but she failed to notice the one-pointer approaching from behind. When Izuku saw this, he ran as quickly as he could. Mina didn't notice the robot until she heard it and turned around to see its arm reared back to punch her. She was celebrating her achievement of scoring 56 points, which put her above the 40 points needed to be reviewed and accepted into UA. I apologize, Kiri. Before Izuku entered and used his sword to decapitate the robot, she thought, I won't be making it into UA. After landing on the ground, he turned to face Mina, who was shocked. Hey, are you okay? With sincere concern, he inquired. For the first time in her life, Mina felt her heart skip a beat, and then a blush began to appear on her cheeks, turning them lilac. All right, after saving me, this adorable guy asks if I'm okay. And I'm blushing, damn it. I must make things better. Being saved by a cutie like you, she asked herself, smirking to hide her blush. I'm more than fine, perhaps I ought to thank my hero with a kiss, she teased. When Izuku heard this, she flushed. Even though Himiko was aware that some of his summons preferred him over a master, she still felt a little envious as she glanced in the direction of Izuku's location. As Tsunade was getting ready to begin surgery at a hospital, her left eyebrow twitched, and she felt what Izuku was feeling before seeing what he saw. She became so enraged that she broke her scalpel in two. Her leaking of her killing intent and her muttering about killing a pink-skinned alien made the nearby doctors and nurses cower in terror. The maids at the mansion had differing opinions about Izuku. Some were relieved that he had found someone else, while others were envious and wanted to go to UA and discipline that woman. Only someone as great as Sebas should and could get a harem, so when he saw and felt that his master was building one, he nodded in agreement. Inko simply laughed as she watched all of this. She will be content as long as she has grandchildren. Well, Izuku stammered in shame as Mina smiled even more and leaned forward to reveal a small portion of her cleavage, much to his growing embarrassment. Hero, what's wrong? Is a woman incapable of kissing her savior? She continued to tease. Before Mina could say anything more, they heard rumbling and saw a huge robot rise from the ground, taller than most of the buildings and even using some to help it stand up to its full height. Izuku was dying of embarrassment. Gosh, that thing is enormous. They mentioned an obstacle, but that's excessive, Mina remarked. No, this is not very good. Izuku said, Nezu would fare much worse. The zero-pointer said, lethal weapons authorized. Point proven. Mina and Izuku were about to flee when Izuku heard something that caused him to halt. Someone help, a voice called out. He turned to see Ochako pinned to the ground by a pile of rubble. He stopped dead in his tracks, turned around, and started running back to her without hearing Mina's call. Ochako looked up and threw out all the dust, calling out for help but seeing no one coming, and cried in agony as she attempted to pull herself out, but it only made the broken bone hurt more. This is where I will die. I'm so close to my goal, she thought dejectedly, but for some reason, she saw the picture of Izuku saving her, which inspired her to work even harder. She attempted to move the rubble by touching it, but she was exhausted and puked from the stress. A shadow passed over her before she could try again, and she looked up to see Izuku land on the ground ahead of her. After glancing at the situation, he walked forward to the rubble, grabbed it, and started to lift it off the ground with Sebas's explosive strength. Even though Ochako was taken aback, she kept her composure and pulled her leg out as soon as the pressure subsided. When he realized she was free, he let go of the debris and draped one of her arms over his shoulder before getting to his feet and saying, "Come on, we have to leave." He spoke quickly. Since Ochako's left leg was broken, Izuku assisted her in walking as they both started to move as quickly as they could. As it continued its destructive trajectory, the zero-pointer swung its arm and collided with a building, causing it to collapse. After that, some debris fell and knocked Ochako and Izuku to the ground. Izuku's sketchpad was also knocked out, with the book open on the page where the fox drawing was. "Are you okay, Uraraka?" He looked at her as he spoke. "Why yeah," she said in agony. Izuku grinned and was ready to dash back to her when the ground shook and they looked toward the zero-pointer, which was only a half-mile away. He said, "And no," in horror and shock, starting to fear for Ochako's life rather than his own. He couldn't save her in this way. As he was thinking these things, his subconscious sent a kind of distress signal that struck each summons, and they all heard the same thing screamed in every cell of their bodies. "Keep Master Izuku safe. Power. who was the closest person besides Nightcrawler, abruptly stopped what she was doing and sprinted as quickly as her legs would allow in the direction of Izuku. Don't worry, I'll come to your rescue." Izuku tried to reassure Ochako as he crawled over to her, his hand inadvertently touching the book. He glared at the zero-pointer, knowing that he had no other option but to defeat it. Instead of glowing the yellowish-purple color it usually does, the drawing in the book started to glow red. Suddenly, Izuku's thought of a name, and his eyes glowed with authority and power as he screamed the name while glaring at the zero-pointer. "Khan!" His voice echoed loudly. A massive multi-eyed fox head abruptly emerged from the building next to the zero-pointer, and it quickly bit off the upper portion of the zero-pointer's body in a single bite. Ochako, who had never seen anything this incredible before, was among the many viewers who were in complete shock. Before she vanished in a cloud of smoke, Khan uttered the words, "This robot tastes horrible, master. Please let me eat something fleshy and tasty next time you summon me." This also demonstrated that the upper portion of the zero-pointer's body was entirely gone. Izuku's eyes stopped glowing red as soon as she vanished, and he began to feel dizzy. Before he could comprehend what had happened, he passed out while someone was yelling his name. It was safe to say that Izuku was still trying to make sense of what had happened during the entrance exam, which had been a few days ago. No matter how much he thought about it, it made no sense. He had never summoned it before, so why did he suddenly know its name? Moreover, how did it summon when he didn't touch the drawing to call upon it? His eyes began to glow red as spirals formed in them, and as he was thinking this, he looked up at the mirror in his bathroom and froze. He leaned forward and watched it grow until both of his eyes were like this, frightening him. Izuku closed his eyes and rubbed them to check if he was simply tired or if something was in them, but when he opened them again, he found himself in a vast, open world with trees and open fields stretching for miles. When he looked up at the sky, his eyes widened even more upon realizing that it was completely covered with closed doors, rather than a blue sky. He then looked around and noticed tiny balls of light wandering around, some of which were even floating or flying in the sky. They were all different colors, some of which were the typical yellowish-purple. As they moved through this open world, others were colored red or blue. Where am I?" he asked, scanning the globe to determine his location. He felt as though every single ball of light abruptly turned to face him after he finished speaking, and nearly all of them were beaming with joy at the sight of him. Then Izuku abruptly grabbed his head as it was filled with what seemed like thousands of voices talking in this strange world and inside his head. "Master! Master is here! We must greet him! If Master is here, does that mean he's happy to see us? Master, why don't we have forms yet?" Before he knew it, he was on his knees, clutching his head in agony from taking in all of the voices that were suddenly pouring into his head. "Master is in pain. Why is Master in pain? We need to help our Master." They all transitioned from excitement to anxiety before gradually making their way to Izuku, who was still trying to take it all in, but it was too much and felt like his brain was about to burst. However, they abruptly came to a halt when the earth shattered and Khan's head emerged, glaring at them all. "All of you back off. Master can't handle all of you overwhelming him at once. His mental fortitude isn't strong enough yet," Khan said while glaring at them. Some of them did apologize before they left, but the balls of light stopped and Izuku heard whispers before they all began to slowly disappear. As they began to depart, Khan turned to face her master, who was beginning to improve now that the other summons weren't overpowering him. With an apologetic tone, Khan said, "I apologize for that, Master. I should have arrived sooner." Now that he was back on track, he said, "And no, it's okay. It wasn't your fault, Khan, but where are we exactly?" In a puff of smoke, Khan vanished and materialized on his shoulder as a scaled-down version of herself. "This way we can walk and talk," she said. "But to answer your question, Master, we are in your mind, or the summon world." He sounded surprised as he said, "Wait, this is my mind." She pointed to the area around them and said, "A part of it, yes. This is where all the summons who don't have forms live, or if you send us back or we wish to return to." As they continued to walk, Izuku remarked, "I see, and what about all these doors up in the sky? What are they for?" He could make out a huge ocean in the distance, where spheres of light were either in or gathered around it. "A summons is located at each of these doors. Each of your summonses has a door that only they can enter or exit through, so you can leave here and enter your world," she said. He pointed to a cluster of yellowish-purple balls of light circling a tree as a blue and red ball looked on, saying, "Wow, why do some of you have different colors?" Different scales of power. The yellowish-purple are more of, well, without trying to sound mean, common summons that aren't extremely powerful. Blue ones are more powerful than them, while the red ones are all combat-oriented, so they are much stronger than everyone else, she continued. Is that why you in power have reddish colors when I summoned you? Izuku inquired. Yes, and for example, the common ones can fight but they aren't exactly made for it. Take Sebas for example on that note. Meanwhile those combat maids, he had you summon, had a blue glow when you summoned them, since they can fight better, but aren't fully combat-oriented, Khan replied. Wow! That's amazing, Khan! Izuku exclaimed, her eyes glimmering. Unbeknownst to him, the summons were all happier as a result of their ability to sense his happiness. It's all thanks to you, Master, that any of this is possible and that we exist. If not for you then we wouldn't be here, she said while staring at him. He couldn't help but say, wow, once more in amazement. They kept walking for some time, but Izuku was unwittingly approaching a darker area of the summon world that had been created as a result of the extreme trauma and abuse he had endured. Since this is where they belong, the lovely forests and verdant grasslands quickly began to vanish and transform into a dead forest with no life other than a few light balls that float around the area. Knowing that the nine would not approve of her letting their master here, Khan frantically said, Master, we should leave this place. You are not ready for the summons further in here. He pointed to a huge set of doors that were higher than the apartment he had previously occupied and had cracks all over them. Oh okay, but what's that? He said. Khan looked at him and said, Master, please leave this place now. With a terrified tone. Despite not being able to hear what Khan was saying, Izuku began to approach it in an attempt to learn more about this enormous door. As he did, he began to feel fear and all of his other negative emotions began to fill his body. He kept walking until he was within 100 feet of the door, at which point he heard 9 voices in his head talking simultaneously. Before everything turned black, they said, Forgive us, Master, but you have to leave or they will kill you. When Izuku opened his eyes, he was back in the restroom, and he was just rubbing his eyes with his hands away from his face. Wait, was that all a dream? He asked puzzledly, in a low voice. Khan said, No, Master, it wasn't. Oh, so you're still in the summon world? He asked, remembering that he has mental connections with his summons after he had jumped and looked around without seeing her. Yes, and I'm here to apologize given you weren't supposed to see that door since you're not ready for what lays beyond it, she responded. The others just stayed out, so Izuku said, Okay, I understand, but quick question, how do I summon you? Like you tested with Sebas, you can just call my name and I'll appear in my small form, but if you need me to fight then stick your pointer and pinky fingers up, while having your thumb and other 2 finger together to look like a hand puppet of a dog. After that, look through THR opening and aim it at your opponent and call my name, that will make me appear in my large form, she continued. Okay. And thank you for showing me all of this, Khan. It seems a little weird to know so little about my quirk, but I really appreciate your help, he replied. As if recalling something, Khan abruptly stopped herself in the middle of her sentence. It's okay, Master, you still know this overall, and the 9 haven't deemed you ready to learn everything given your own mental trauma through L. Khan. The mental connection was broken after she said, I'm sorry, Master. I said something you weren't ready for. Just remember, if you need my assistance then summon me. He asked himself, bewildered, that was strange, but why does all the trauma I went through affect my quirk, and who are the 9? Izuku entered his room after using the restroom, and as he did so, he received a mental message from a summons he had made just a week prior. Now that she has all the weapons she needs and is headed home, she will continue to teach Izuku how to use them correctly rather than using the swing and hope it lands method. When he created her, he recalled that he had called in a weapon expert to instruct him because he wanted to rely on his own strength rather than entirely rely on his summons or their powers for battle. They didn't have any actual weapons, which is another reason she had to leave. She took one of the maids with her and went off to custom order all the weapons and make sure they were prepared for battle. Inko shouted from downstairs, Izuku, please come down here, we have guests. Coming, he exclaimed as he began to make his way to the door, wondering who would visit them as they hardly ever have visitors. While one of the combat maids was giving them instructions, he passed some of the regular maids he had called in, who were all cleaning the mansion. He heard flapping abruptly, and Nightcrawler landed on his shoulder, crooning softly to get his attention. Izuku said to him, Hey, I see you're back from your flight, how was it? He didn't say anything to him, but he sensed in his mind that he liked it. As he arrived at the staircase, he said, I'm glad you enjoyed it, now let's go downstairs, we have guests. He started to descend the stairs. He froze when he turned to see who his mother had called him as he descended the last few steps. Mina and Ochako were there, and they were both fascinated by the mansion, especially Ochako, who had never seen one in her life. Mina hurried over to him and exclaimed, Hi Midoriya. How are ya doing? He flushed when he saw that she ran straight up to him, sporting shorts that showed off her athletic muscles halfway down her thigh while still appearing soft to the touch, and a black shirt that was a little tight and showed off a good deal of her cleavage. He said, embarrassed, oh, I'm doing good. Then, as a faint shade of lilac tinted her cheeks, he noticed her smile. Ochako, dressed in a white long-sleeve shirt and a black skirt, approached from behind her. Seeing her, Izuku also couldn't help but blush. Some of the maids in the room appeared pleased, while others scowled at the two girls who caught his eye and caused him to flush. Izuku said, a little alarmed, Hey how did you know where I lived? All I remember is passing out then waking up at Ua and heading home. He came and gave me a note that told me where your house is and that you were free today, Ochako said, gesturing to Nightcrawler. Mina smiled and said, same here. Sebas looked at Nightcrawler and gave him the thumbs up, which caused the crow to puff out his chest in pride, while Izuku could only sigh at this. He took the peanut that Inko had more or less snuck over and given him, flew to the table, and started pecking at it before opening it to eat. Well, he said, rubbing the back of his head in embarrassment, it's nice to see you two and sorry about during the test. Oh, you have nothing to apologize for. If it wasn't for you, then Ochako here might not be here and I might have been knocked out cold, preventing me from finishing the exam, said Mina with a grin. Her cheeks turned a slightly darker shade of lilac as she said, so in other words Midori, you kinda are a hero for saving us. As someone who had never been referred to as a hero in his life, Izuku blushed in shame. He blushed as his brain finally processed what she had called him. Wait, Midori, he asked. She remarked, I think it's a lot cuter. Ochako moved in and said, can I call you Midori as well? Before he could respond. Why yeah, he said, feeling even more ashamed. Unbeknownst to him, some maids became more envious. Tsunade developed a jealous tick mark while at the hospital, and somewhere in the city, in a car on his way to his mansion, his weapon expert summon experienced a mild jealousy for an unknown reason. Izuku's mind was gradually revisiting the last time he had been treated nicely by girls, but before he could fully recall anything, there was a knock on the door. Welcome back, Ms. Toga, Sebas said as he approached it, opened it, and a tiny smile appeared on his face. Sebas, I told you to call me Himiko. I don't like hearing my last name, she grumbled. He gave an apologetic, right. Please forgive me, it won't happen again, response. Waving it away, she regained her smile and was eager to spend the entire day with Izu and herself alone. The two girls she vaguely remembered from the UA entrance exam were in front of her, and they were close to Izuku. A tick mark appeared on the back of Himiko's head, and she continued to smile while yelling, who are these two and why are they here with Izuku? Oh hey Himiko, he said, grinning broadly. She continued to smile as she approached them, past the two girls, and then put her arms around him and pushed his arm into the valley of her breasts. I missed you Izu, she crooned, causing his face to light up. Since she had just asserted her ownership of what was rightfully hers, Himiko regarded the two girls with a victorious grin, though neither Mina nor Ochako knew why. They wanted to do that with Izuku because they were envious. The fact that Himiko was touchy, but never this touchy, and that the other two appeared envious and began speaking in strained tones made Izuku blush uncontrollably. When the memories he had repressed finally came back to him, his blush disappeared. After receiving a note back at Aldera telling him that some girls liked him and asked him to come to the cafeteria so they could talk, he went there, only to find a bucket full of rotten food and other items thrown on his head as soon as he opened the door. Then, as he was recording this, Katsuki, who was laughing at him, gave him a powerful blow to the stomach. The girls then approached him and began to make fun of him for being unusual. They told him that no one would ever love him and that he should accept that he would die by suicide to spare any woman the agony of seeing him. Izuku swiftly dismissed those ideas because he had known Himiko for a few years and knew she wouldn't act in such a way and would defend him in such a situation. Izuku rubbed the back of his head with his free arm and said, since we are all here, would all of you like to come to the living room so we can talk? Himiko continued to hold his arm as she accompanied him to the living room, and the three girls agreed to end the tense conversation almost instantly. Ochako and Mina both experienced mild jealousy, with Ochako appearing a little let down and Mina actually puffing up her cheeks in an attempt to tease him. They all went to the living room, a huge space with a fireplace, 2 couches, and a few recliners facing a big table in the middle. The furniture also faced a huge TV that Sebas had purchased for Izuku and Inko without their knowledge at the time. Mina exclaimed in amazement, "Wow, your living room is massive." Ochako was still attempting to comprehend the reality that she, friend, was wealthy, and she genuinely questioned whether this is the way the wealthy live. Yeah, one of my colleagues is out in the world making us money, which he sends us all and giving we have money, we got recommended this place." Izuku felt ashamed. In case they needed anything, Sebas followed them, saying, "It's a fine place for my master, any less and it would be an insult." Alpha and Beta also arrived. "Hey Izu, where's Power?" Himiko asked, unsure of the whereabouts of her older sister figure. "She's asleep, she decided to stay up all night watching movies," Izuku replied. She laughed as she remarked, "That sounds like her." Mina started talking to break the ice after they all awkwardly sat down and sat in silence. Inquiring about the origins of her new acquaintances, she said, "So, Ochako, where are you from? Same for you too." She rubbed the back of her head and said, "Well, I'm from Mie Prefecture, and I live with my mom and dad, and they have me staying at an apartment they are building over here near UA." When she said that, Izuku almost instantly recalled that a small apartment complex had been constructed just 2 train stops from UA. He recalled this because he passes it every time he takes the train. It wouldn't happen to be that apartment complex in Musudafu near Central, that's under really heavy construction? Asked Izuku. Ochako actually gave him a startled look and asked, yeah, how did you know?" "Whenever I ride the train or head in that direction, I've passed it multiple times," said the man. "Oh, I remember it," replied Himiko. "If I remember correctly, they only got insulation and stuff installed like a week and a half ago, right? They don't even have the wiring or plumbing installed yet." Hating that she's bringing down the mood with her financial situation, she said, yeah. "I'm currently living in it until my parents get the check they are owed by the city for the last month, and if I get accepted. We have plenty of extra room if you want to stay here with us," Inko said as he entered the living room, approached the girl, and gave her a hug. "Oh, you poor girl. What? No, I couldn't. Don't worry, I'll be fine, it's just another week and I'll be in my own apartment for UA," she replied. With no room for debate, she declared, "Well, if you say so, but you're staying here for dinner, I'm not gonna let you go home without a hot meal in your stomach." She tried to hide the fact that she was blushing and that happy tears were welling up in her eyes because this woman was being so kind to her when she had no reason to be, but she said meekly, "Oh, okay, and thank you." "No problem, sweetie. Oh, I'm sorry for interrupting your little date you're all having," she replied. Izuku and Ochako exclaimed in shame, "Date?" Himiko flushed and wanted to give Izuku a closer hug and even a cheek kiss, or better his mouth. Mina's eyes glinted mischievously as she smiled despite her blush. Izuku exclaimed, Mom, this isn't a date." When their master spoke, the maids in the room nodded in agreement. As she turned to leave, Inko laughed again and said, "I know, just wanted to tease you one last time before I leave. Dinner will be ready in a couple hours," she added. Izuku sighed after she left and then turned to face the 3 girls. "Sorry about her," he said. "No worries, but just know, if you ever need a place to crash, you can always come over to my place," Mina laughed. "Thank you," Ochako said. "Okay, now I guess it's my turn. I used to live in Chiba Prefecture, before me and my family moved here a couple years ago and I met my best friend Toru. Then the rest was just new school and I came to UA, where I met a very cute green-haired hero," replied Mina. Himiko glared at him with narrowed eyes, and Izuku blushed and turned away. He rubbed the back of his head and remarked, "Well, I was born and raised here in Musudafu, but after some events I moved here near UA." Before asking for the story, Ochako and Mina wanted to become friends because they were still essentially strangers and didn't want to push the issue. Himiko hugged him and made him blush. "I grew up in the outskirts of Tokyo and, well, my past doesn't matter that much, besides I met my special hero Izu," she said. Unaware that they were pouting, Ochako and Mina wanted to give him a hug in that manner when they saw this. After that, they spoke for the next hour or two about their goals, aspirations, lives, amusing anecdotes, and hobbies. However, as their conversation went on, Mina at last recalled a question she had been meaning to ask Izuku but had completely forgotten to do so earlier. She looked at him and said, "Hey Midori, what's your quirk?" The room fell silent as Himiko and Izuku exchanged glances, not sure whether to tell them about his peculiarity or what it is and what would happen if word spread. It's impossible to predict what might occur. I don't know if it'd be the best to tell you. If people found out about my quirk, who know what will happen, Izuku replied. Ochako asked, "Is it that dangerous?" "Yes and no. You can tell us if you want to. We don't tell a soul. I may be a blabbermouth, but I never tell my friends secrets, since that's just something you never do," Mina replied. She never shared anyone's secrets because she understood firsthand how painful it was to know someone you trusted with a secret and then tell others about it. Ochako raised her eyebrows and said, "If you want to, then go ahead and tell us, if not then you don't have to and can whenever you feel comfortable enough to." When Izuku looked directly into their eyes, he saw that they were being totally honest with him and showed no signs of dishonesty. He inhaled deeply before telling them about his peculiarity and how it partially functions. He didn't want them to be fully aware of it. After a few minutes, he paused and merely gave them a basic explanation of how it operated. When he looked up, he noticed that Mina appeared to be suffering from a brain injury, while Ochako was in awe. As he explained it, he swore he saw smoke rising from the top of her head. The weapon expert that Izuku had called in entered through the door before they could say anything more. As she walked through the mansion carrying a bag full of various weapons, she shouted, "Hey, I finally got all the weapons, let's get to training master." She was a young lady, tall and athletic. Her dark green hair is pulled back in a short ponytail, and she has tiny golden eyes. She wore glasses and had fringes of hair over her forehead, with smaller strands framing her cheeks. Her name was Maki, and she was a real weapon expert. Since using a sword or hammer was the simplest for them to make, she essentially taught Power and Izuku how to use them. She only needed to assist Himiko in correcting a few aspects of her fighting technique. As she left the kitchen with Sebas at her heels, Inko grinned and said, "Oh Maki, welcome back." Her smile was warm as she said, "Hello, Mrs. Midoriya. It's great to see you." She giggled a little and said, "Hee, oh you always so polite." "So where's my master? I gotta train him up for Ua, since I finally got all the weapons I need," she replied. "He's in the living room with Himiko and two guests, that he saved during the entrance exam," said Inko. She walked in that direction and said, "Okay, well, I'll see ya in a bit then." Before returning to the kitchen, Inko remarked, "She's really sweet, even though she can be a little rough around the edges." In the meantime, a fresh crack appeared in Izuku's mind, in front of the enormous door he had approached earlier today. A piece of the door fell off, revealing a blood-red glowing eye gazing out into the world. Nothing was more important to this creature than eliminating any threat to its master. It was a hideous thing. Even though Izuku knew he did well, he was still quite anxious that he hadn't done well, so he sat in his room and stared at the letter he received from Ua. He was just as anxious as he had been when he had first assisted that girl, Mina, in the test and she had begun to flirt with him. Then he remembered Ochako and how pleasant she had been to him during their visit to his house a week prior, during which time they had spent nearly every other day chatting and chatting. Izuku shook his head, glanced at the letter, and took a deep, soothing breath before opening it to reveal a tiny disc that turned on the moment he touched it. When he dropped it on his desk, a screen with Nezu grinning was displayed. "Hello Izuku, it's so good to finally have this message be heard from you," Nezu replied. Surprised that he would be the one sending him this, he asked, "Principale Nezu?" "Indeed, it is me, the only other people interested in sending you one were Aizawa, 13 and Hound Dog," Nezu replied. "Wait, this is a recording. How do you know what I'm saying?" Izuku replied. "Don't worry about it." Yes, Izuku would be concerned about it. "Anyways, I'm here to tell you that you passed the written test with flying colors. You scored 780 out of 790, coming second only to Momo Yaoyorozu who got 783 out of 790 inches," Nezu said with a grin. He sighed with relief upon learning that he performed so well and that he had aced the written exam. Now on to the practical. "Not only did you beat the set goal by a large margin, but you went out of your way along with power to save lots of other participants in the test and even risked your life to save someone in need by destroying the zero-pointer, Nezu said with a broad grin. The beaks to all of this, you got yourself 154 villain points and 120 hero points, making your final score be 274 points, setting a new UA record and beating All Might's score by over 100 points. When Izuku heard that, he looked at Nezu with wide eyes and couldn't help but smile. Izuku grinned even more when the scoreboard appeared and he realized he was first, but that smile vanished right away. And Katsuki Bakugo came in second. When he was informed that he would be in Aizawa's class, he started to feel anxious because he would probably have to be in Katsuki's class. Izuku felt a nudge on his cheek before his panic could worsen, even though all of his summons felt it starting to set in. It was Nightcrawler, who behaved somewhat like Izuku's emotional support animal. Hound Dog, the school therapist, gave him the go-ahead for Izuku to take him anywhere on school property. He said, scratching his chin, "Thank you." Nightcrawler crooned a little and then returned his attention to the screen, where Nezu resumed his conversation. "I'm sure you noticed that Katsuki got second place and are now panicking that he will be in your class. You'd be right, but don't worry, he's on an incredibly short leash and every member of staff along with the big three giving their position, have been informed on him. So if he does anything, he will only get a single warning then be handed to the police for them to deal with him in the eyes of the law," Nezu said. Knowing that all of his teachers have been notified about Bakugo and will be watching him gave Izuku some peace of mind. To get him to stop thinking about the past, which was slowly resurfacing in his thoughts, Nightcrawler gave him another nudge on the cheek. Izuku smiled a little more because Nightcrawler had figured out how to assist him. Before the connection dropped and the disc exploded, shocking Izuku, Nezu said, "Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Besides that, school will start on Monday, so till then Izuku." He whispered to himself, "Crazy rat." Maki exclaimed, now, as she swung her polearm at Izuku at incredibly high speeds. Izuku was bleeding and covered in bruises from the numerous blows he had received, but he never gave up and returned for the next round. He took out his 3 staffs, twisted them until they broke into 3 sections, and then grabbed one end and swung it at her. She was able to deflect it easily, but he used the chain to wrap it around her polearm and secure it. He grabbed the bottom part and swung it at her, but she jumped back and blew him backwards by putting her foot in his stomach. Nezu, a student who was tasked with designing and building his costume and maintaining all of his equipment, helped to swiftly re-establish the staff. Izuku read the letter and, if he recalled correctly, her name was Mei Hatsume. She had a lot of passion but was a little everywhere. Maki yelled, "Stay focused," and slammed the weighted end of her polearm into his face, forcing him to retreat farther. Although she knew it was a necessary evil to prepare him for hero work, she never enjoyed injuring him during training. Maki was about to block his staff swing as he charged forward, shaking his head, but Izuku did something he had never done before at the last second. He stepped into her guard and caused her to trip as he quickly swung the section away from her polearm. Izuku used Sebas' strength to overpower her arms as she fell back, holding the end of his staff to her chin while he grabbed her by the collar of her shirt with his other arm. Laughing and panting, he said, "Huff huff, I finally broke your guard." Grinning. "Oh, you did, a little sloppy, but with time and more training, you'll be a master at that. Now, could you let go of my shirt? You're touching my chest," Maki said, blushing and turning her head away after giving him a startled look. "And don't lose concentration, since you did it's still my win," she said as her staff struck Izuku's face as he was about to jump away after realizing what he was doing and his face went nuclear. Ignoring the heated glares from Lupus Regina and Narberl, Maki attempted to suppress her nervousness. "It's fine, master, and don't feel bad about doing that. You're fighting for your life when fighting a villain, so even if it's a girl don't be afraid to hit her hard or somewhere inappropriate," Maki replied. Izuku nodded. It's difficult, but he's been trying. Until Maki started hitting him more forcefully, which made him hit her harder, and he punched hard. Bzzzt, he felt his phone ring, so he went to check it out and saw that Mina had left a message. "Mina. Hello, Ochako and I received our acceptance letters. We are going to a cafe in Neko. Please join us, and since I know Himiko enjoys cats, bring Power with us. Sorry Maki, but I'll have to cut training short. I'm going to hang out with my friends to celebrate us all getting into UA together," he said with a small smile before putting his phone away and getting to his feet. "Sure thing, master, we can continue this later," Maki said, nodding her head. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX call him when he was ready to be picked up. He then got out of the car, Nightcrawler on his shoulder, and looked around the neighborhood. He was allowed to enter any building with Izuku because he was his emotional support animal, but since this was a Neko Kappa copyright, he advised him to wait outside for his own safety. As Nightcrawler watched Izuku and Power enter, he nodded his head, flew up to a power line, and sat down on it. As he entered the Kappa copyright, he noticed something that made him flush, but Power chose to ignore it entirely and proceeded to a group of cats. She exclaimed joyfully, "It's more meowies," before laughing and approaching them. Izuku was staring at Ochako, who had a pair of cat ears on top of her head and was playing with a cat. Above the cat that was constantly swatting at them, she held a long, feathered plastic stick and said, "Ah, aren't you the cutest?" Izuku murmured, glancing at Ochako rather than the cat, "She is very cute." Mina, sporting a pair of cat ears, appeared next to him and teased, "Ah, am I not that cute, Midori?" He blushed when he saw her like that and turned away, asking himself, why does every girl I meet have to be both cute and beautiful? "You know, I still haven't thanked ya for saving me, Midori," she said, smiling as she leaned closer. Izuku began to feel anxious, but she was stopped before she could react when Ochako and another girl slapped the back of her head. A girl with long, messy, wavy chartreuse hair, pink specs, bushy eyelashes, and large round eyes with pupils that are yellow on the inside and teal on the outside said, "Mina, stop that. You said I was going to meet your new friend, not watch you suck face with someone." Before she muttered the final line to herself, which fortunately no one heard, Ochako said, "She's right, Mina, besides you don't get to kiss him first." Master, look at all these cats. Ha 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 ha. All of them turned to see Power in a corner booth, surrounded by half of the Kappa copyright's cats, all of whom were purring. "Good job, Power. Also please don't yell," Izuku said, looking exhausted. She moaned, nodded, and resumed playing with the cats. "Oh right, I haven't introduced you. This is my friend Toru Hagakuri. She's my best friend and I invited her here to meet ya so we can all be friends when we go to Ua," replied Mina. As he nervously held out his hand to her, he said, Hi, my name is Izuku Midoriya, it's nice to meet you." She took it with a smile on her face and saw right away that he had some scars on his hands, but she didn't bring it up to be polite because she knew that not everyone wanted to discuss their scars. As Power joined them with 4 cats, Toru said, "It's nice to meet you, Midoriya. I hope we can be good friends. Now come on, let's all go sit down." They introduced themselves as they sat down, including their peculiarities, but Izuku's quirk was the last to be mentioned. She started to say, and Midori's quirk is super cool, he can sue, but quickly stopped herself because it was Izuku's secret to share, not hers. With curiosity, Toru asked, "What's your quirk?" Maybe I can tell you one day. I'd like to get to know you a little more before I do tell you," Izuku replied. She smiled and said, "That's understandable, everyone is entitled to their own secrets. Let's celebrate now." "Yes, let's enjoy ourselves," Mina said, beaming broadly. After that, they ordered tea or coffee for everyone to enjoy along with some takoyaki, gyoza, and onigiri. When Ochako tasted the takoyaki for the first time in her life, she exclaimed, "Man, this is so good." "I know, right? I'm really surprised it's this good, especially since most Kappa copyrights aren't known for the best food," Mina replied. "All of this meat belongs to me, but I don't care." Power said this as she grabbed the gyoza and started gobbling them up, preventing anyone else from having any. Knowing that Power would consume a lot of the Euro, she loves meat above all else Euro, Izuku simply chose to leave it alone and place additional orders. They all kept talking until the front door opened and Himiko walked into the Kappa copyright grinning broadly, the paperwork completed, and she was free to live with Izu instead of her abusive family for the time being. "Izu," she exclaimed joyfully as she rushed forward to greet him, and before he could even see her, he was encircled by a firm embrace, his face nestled into her enormous chest. Himiko was so happy that she couldn't stop smiling. She had finally been able to leave her family and live a happy life. She let go of him and turned to face a flushed Izuku. She smiled warmly and said, "Thank you for being my friend, Izu." She then leaned in and kissed him, which made his eyes widen and his face redder. "Minas," and Ochako's jaws dropped, and they were a little envious, though they weren't sure why. Since Himiko received his first kiss, the majority of his female summons have felt his emotions and then jealousy. Izuku's face turned redder and the blood moved to another place when his brain finally recovered enough to allow him to look at Himiko. Izuku's face turned redder and the blood moved to another place when his brain finally recovered enough to allow him to look at Himiko. He blushed and said, why you look are really beautiful Himiko. She gave him another hug and grinned more, saying, thank you, Izu. So, who are you? Toru asked, glancing at the new girl, who, she had to admit, was breathtakingly gorgeous and had a natural cuteness about her, which her fangs seemed to only enhance. Himiko is my name, though. Just Himiko, she said, her smile more forced as she took a seat. Well, Himiko, it's good to meet you. So, would you mind telling me why you now live with Izuku? Toru inquired inquisitively. My parents despise me, which is why. Because of my peculiarity, they view me as a monster. She said in a somber tone, I was forced to be something I'm not because of that. However, she smiled as she turned to face Izuku. But then I met Izuku and he became my very first real friend. He was the first to consider my peculiarity heroic, and he didn't pass judgment on me. To Himiko's surprise, Izuku put an arm around her shoulders and pulled her into a sideways hug while staring into her honey yellow eyes. Well, I could tell that you were hurt and needed a friend, so I extended a hand to you that day and I'm glad I did, since you were my first real friend too, he replied with a grin. Before leaning in to kiss his cheek and lean against him, she gave him a wide-eyed look. Mina and Ochako gave her more mildly envious looks. I love you, she muttered to herself. What? Startled, he said. I told you I loved you. She continued to lean against him while grinning contentedly, saying, I know you don't feel the same right now, but I hope one day soon you will. Izuku's face looked like it was going to burst from the blushing he was doing, and he was also embarrassed that he couldn't give her his heart right now because he was still dealing with too much and couldn't let anyone in. Toru said, well, that's sweet to see and hear, but let's move on. What kind of heroes do you all aspire to be, and what do you want to do with your lives? For me, I want to be a hero who can demonstrate that anyone can be a hero, no matter what their quirk is. After a few years, I'd like to settle down and have at least 3 children. Izuku asked, what is your quirk? Invisibility. Wow, that's a really good quirk. With something like that, you would be amazing at infiltration missions. Hey, maybe you can ask Himiko for help with hand-to-hand combat, Izuku replied. Toru gave Izuku a startled glance before turning to Himiko. I wouldn't mind giving you a lesson or two. She smiled and said, sweet, let's find a day to do it before school starts then. Cool, now it's my turn, said Mina with an enormous grin. My quirk is acid and it lets me create and shoot acid from every part of my body, and I wanna be a super fun hero and make all my siblings proud, then take a break being a hero to have a large family, then once they are a bit older go back to hero work for a while. That is a pretty good goal, Izuku grinned. Since she has always worked to provide for her parents so they don't have to work so hard every day, she was unsure when she said, my quirk is called zero gravity and I wanna be a hero to make enough money to get my parents out of debt and live a simple life. After that maybe have a small family with 2 or 3 kids. That's a very admirable goal, Mina replied. If my parents were in the same situation I'd wanna do the same. All but Power nodded. Aside from perhaps Himiko, who was her younger sister, she didn't really care. Taking a deep, soothing breath, Himiko paused for a moment before continuing. Well, my quirk is called transform. If I drink someone's blood then I'm able to transform into them and mimic everything but their quirk. For my dreams, it's to show even those with villainous quirks can be a hero. And, her eyes briefly darted to Izuku before saying, have a family. She expected them to give her disgusted looks. However, none of them offered her one. Instead, they all grinned at her, which made her very happy. Well, for me, I'm not ready to say my quirk yet. But for my dream, it's to be a beacon for everyone, someone that everybody can rely on to save them whenever they need rescuing. After that I'm not sure. I never thought much further ahead, Izuku replied. After that, the days passed quickly. Izuku spent the entire week training, but he also spent time with his friends and other people. Even though it was a little uncomfortable at times, ever since Himiko gave him 2 kisses and told him she was in love with him, whenever the maids or Tsunade would make advances on him. His mother's constant taunting of him didn't help either. When Nightcrawler jabbed his beak into his cheek, he snapped out of his reverie and realized he was standing in front of the door to Class 1A. He said, "Thank you," to him, and Nightcrawler simply crooned back as he settled into his shoulder. "I really hope that blue-haired student isn't gonna be in here, it's already bad enough Bakugo will be in here." He heard shouting as he opened the classroom door. "Get your feet off the desk, you are dishonoring previous generations of students and future students by having your feet on your desk," screamed the pupil. "Fuck off, Four Eyes, I don't have time to deal with you, you worthless piece of shit," he growled. Izuku glanced around the room and saw only two other students, one of whom was a teenager with red and white bicolored hair and a facial scar. With her spiky black hair and obsidian black eyes, the other student was a stunning woman with a very mature body. He was on his way to the rear of the room when he noticed Aizawa in his sleeping bag, lying on the floor behind his desk. After murmuring to himself, "Some things never change," he crept to the back of the class and sat down in the back row, directly next to the window. Then, because he enjoys drawing and in anticipation of a potential new summon, he reached into his backpack and took out his sketchpad to start drawing. As Nightcrawler started sketching, he glanced around the classroom and saw the girl with the black hair staring at Izuku with interest. He tilted his head in an attempt to ascertain her intentions, but he quickly saw that it was merely mild curiosity rather than animosity, so he ignored it and kept scanning the room. Izuku kept to himself and drew as time passed and more students came into the room. He also occasionally fed Nightcrawler a peanut that he had in a bag for him. He glanced at his drawing while taking a brief break. It showed a black hooded figure holding a sword, wearing armored gauntlets, and wearing a metal mask over his head. Izuku thought the drawing was strangely appropriate, even though it looked downright demonic and evil. As though he had been waiting for this to be drawn. However, he did get a strange feeling that instructed him to sketch 8 more people without the masks. The blue-haired student finally noticed Izuku and that he had Nightcrawler on his shoulder, which was against the rules because animals were not permitted in UA. Izuku was just about to resume drawing. "You," he shouted as he strode up to Izuku, who was attempting to block him out and ignore him. However, he stopped upon witnessing him attempt to seize Nightcrawler, who was firmly pecking the student's hand. Izuku, trying to control his anger, said in a slightly irritated tone, "What's your problem? Don't touch him." As he pushed up his glasses and performed hand chops, he declared, "Animal aren't allowed here on the UA premises and this is the second time you've done it, you should remove that animal this very instant." Izuku glared at him and said, "No, Nightcrawler is my emotional support animal so I don't have to." Himiko, with her hair down again, ran towards Izuku as the blue-haired student was about to continue. "Izu," she exclaimed, giving him a tight hug. He blushed as he said, "Good morning, Himiko," as she hugged his head and pressed his face against her huge chest. "It's so good to see you. Also I'm really happy we are in the same class. I also heard that Ochako, Mina and Toru were in this class as well," she said with a grin. Her UA uniform hugged her a little tighter, with longer sleeves to cover her hands, and she wore knee-high socks, which only made her thighs appear larger because her skirt was a little shorter. "Really, that's amazing," he said, trying not to die of embarrassment and a nosebleed. She wanted to tease Izuku more after realizing that he had looked at her thighs and chest, but she was tragically cut off. "Himiko, Midori," the blue-haired student began, but Mina interrupted her as she ran in with Ochako and Toru. "Cease this inappropriate behavior or..." All of this was visible to Katsuki at the front of the class, who was about to speak when he sensed a death-like glare emanating from the teacher's desk. He glanced at it and saw a set of bright eyes from a yellow sleeping bag staring at him with a single, straightforward message. "Try it, I dare you." He remained seated, gritting his teeth, but promised to speak with Deku later. Now that everyone was in the classroom, some were chatting until they noticed someone get up from behind the desk and give them a bored look. "It took you all 5 seconds to be quiet, and only 4 of you noticed me while entering the room. We'll need to work on that. Also Iida, that bird on Midoriya's shoulder is indeed his service animal. Also Toga, please stop hugging Midoriya so we can begin class." She walked to her desk, which was next to Izuku's, and let him go, pouting from having to let him go and from being called that name. Ochako was in front of him, Mina was to her right, and Toru was beside her. "Good, now that you're all quiet we can begin. My name is Aizawa and I shall be your sensei as long as you attend here." Now put these uniforms on so we can do a physical test with your quirks, Aizawa replied. The pamphlet stated that all students would be going to orientation, so Chako was perplexed and asked, sir, shouldn't we be heading to orientation and not doing a test? No, that's a waste of time, we are here to teach you Tehi heroes. Also here at UA, the staff is given permission to teach the students how they fit as long as it isn't too life-threatening, Aizawa replied. He's joking, right? Hyoka whispered, but the entire class could hear her. No, my sadistic boss is the same type to feed students and staff to his pet if they annoy him enough. Now grab your uniforms and get changed before you meet me out in the field, he replied as he left. Izuku vaguely recalled Nezu talking about a pet. His name, if he recalled correctly, was Fluffy. That thing wasn't even close to that name. After a clumsy change into his gym attire, he had to use the restroom because he didn't want anyone to notice the scars on his neck, the number brand on the side of his head, or the scars that were still visible, even though his hair was long enough to cover it up, and bite marks from Himiko's blood drinking. Took you all 10 minutes to change. I'll let it slide given this is your first day here, but next time I want it cut down to 5, then work on it being less. You are here to the heroes and time is everything, Aizawa said as they stood out in the field, all of them staring at them. They all said, yes, Aizawa-sensei. The words, Bakugo you're first, now come here, were spoken by Aizawa. Bakugo extended his hands and Aizawa unlocked his quirk suppressant cuffs, enabling him to use his quirk as he marched forward as if he owned the place. After grabbing the ball, Bakugo proceeded to the circle and threw it with a tremendous explosion. Die. Izuku flinched when he heard that because memories flashed back to him, but he was quickly knocked out of it when Nightcrawler pushed against his cheek and he felt a hand squeeze. He turned to see Himiko grinning and Ochako approaching to check on him. Aizawa glared at Bakugo and said, 648 meters, I expected better from someone with so much experience. He passed Izuku before stomping back to the waiting position, his teeth clenched. He growled, beat that you quirkless Deku, as he passed. Aizawa called for Izuku before he could think about what he had said. Midoriya, you scored first in the practical, take the ball and throw it as hard as you can. And I mean you, he stated. Katsuki thought, how the fuck did that quirkless piece of shit score first? He nodded as he moved forward, ignoring everyone's perplexed looks except for those who were aware of his peculiarity. Taking the ball, he made his way to the circle and told Nightcrawler to get out of there so he wouldn't get hurt. Before switching and using Sebas's superhuman strength to throw the ball farther, he used Narbral's lightning to loosen his muscles. Okay, let's try this and hope it works. Even for a second, he thought. He drew his arm back, stepped forward, and threw the ball as hard as he could, sending it hurtling through the air with a sonic boom and shockwave. Aizawa thought, so he's learned how to switch from his summons, faster, good, before his device beeped and displayed the distance, 800 meters, which caused him to smile a little. The majority of the students were taken aback, but his small circle of friends Sayuro, especially Himiko, who was the loudest Sayuro, all applauded him for doing something so incredible. With one student, however, the situation was entirely different. Before he could recall how thin the ice was for Yue's tolerance, Katsuki's anger erupted. How the fuck? When the hell did Deku get a fucking quirk? Wait, he beat me. And he has a quirk, he's been hiding it this whole time, he's been looking down on me and ruined my goddamn life. That worthless piece of garbage, is what he remembered. In his fury, he threw huge explosions as he charged forward. He charged at him and yelled, Deku, how the fuck do you have a quirk, you lying piece of shit? Izuku became agitated, and before he could think or act, he tried to defend himself by using his arms. Aizawa saw Izuku's book glow a yellowish purple with a hint of red in it just as he was ready to activate his quirk and launch his scarf. A black hooded figure emerged from his book before anyone could react, seized Katsuki's wrist, and then used his sword's pommel to slam it into Katsuki's shoulder, shattering the collarbone. Gah! He collapsed to the ground, clutching his shoulder in agony. He attempted to look up, but a metal mask over a black void and a blade to his throat greeted him. With a dark, raspy voice that chilled everyone, he declared, you will not lay another hand on my master Bakugo. If you do, then I won't hold them back anymore. They want you to suffer more than the rest of us. Midoriya, control your quirk and Bakugo, this is one and only warning. Anything like this again and you know the consequences, said Aizawa as she glared at the blonde. No, get your shoulder healed and meet me in my class. Gritting his teeth, he got up and left, but not before giving Izuku and that strange, spectral-looking object from his book a fierce look of hatred. Looking at his new summon, Izuku said, Thank you. Master, don't think about it. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to keep the gate shut. They might have tried something if I hadn't stopped him, BS said in an ambiguous tone. Everyone was left perplexed as the summon vanished, with some people glaring at Izuku or being afraid of him. The others withheld their opinions until they had a better understanding of him. Izu, that was incredible, yelled Himiko, who rushed to embrace him. After deciding that the remaining tests could wait until tomorrow, Aizawa simply sighed and said, Your syllabuses are on my desk, we'll be finishing the tests tomorrow, do whatever till then. He then turned to leave. All Might felt a pit form in his non-existent stomach as he and Nezu watched all of this unfold on the monitor in Nezu's office. This child has a lot of peculiarities. Before turning to face Nezu, he thought, I will need to keep a very close eye on him. We should look into this student. He can call forth these and has other quirks, items. He's not working for him, so we don't have to All Might. Besides, aren't you supposed to be preparing for your class tomorrow? Replied Nezu, also never judge a book by its cover All Might. He narrowed his eyes slightly, ignored it, and walked away. The new summon was back in the summoning world, looking fearfully at the big gate as a new crack appeared on it and a red eye began to glow. When this gate is sufficiently weak, it will kill the diseases that harm its master. On the following day at UA, Aizawa began class by informing everyone that they had been paired with support course students to assist them with their costumes and equipment. They will go meet the aforementioned student today and work with them on any last-minute details for the costume for the first hero class on Thursday. At the moment, Izuku was making his way to the room where Mei Hatsume, a student in his support course, was assigned. Despite his mixed feelings of excitement and anxiety about meeting her, Himiko, Ochako, Mina, and even Toru encouraged him to go, which he greatly valued. As he recalled what transpired when they all introduced themselves to the class before they left, a tiny smile briefly lit up his face before fading. Okay, next is Katsuki Bakugo, said Aizawa, who made the list in a random order to keep students from falling asleep because they knew they might be picked at any moment. Katsuki got to his feet, frowning as usual and his hands in his picked. My name is Katsuki Bakugo, and my quirk is Explosion. You worthless fucking extras, and I'm going to be the next #1 hero. The rest of fucks should just drop out since you won't eat anything but pebbles on my path to #1, he said after glaring at the class. Then, with his typical frown, he returned to his desk and sat down. Because of his attitude and the fact that he attempted to attack Izuku yesterday following his quirk test, the entire class glared at him and already disliked him. Aizawa said, Okay, Izuku Midoriya is last. Himiko whispered, Good luck, loudly enough for only he and a girl wearing Jack's earphones to hear. He stood up and walked to the front of the class, saying, Thank you. He started to feel anxious before Khan spoke in his head. Calm down, master. Remember, we are all here for you and you're not in this alone, Khan replied. At that, Izuku gave a slight nod, and Nightcrawler prodded his cheek to let him know he was also present. He grinned once more before realizing he was now in front of the class. Hello, my name is Izuku Midoriya. I like heroes and to draw in my spare time along with train and learn new things. I also enjoy spending time with my new friends, and my dream is to become a hero that everyone can count on, for my quirk. I'd rather not talk about it. He stated that he did not want to disclose the it went. Iida screamed with hand chops, that is very unheroic-like. Heroes are required to show the public their quirk, and yet here you are dodging it. Himiko, Ochako, Mina, and Toru all squinted at Iida for treating Izuku badly right away. Remembering what that black-cloaked figure had done to him and how it had just snapped his collarbone, Katsuki glared at Izuku and gripped his shoulder as a wave of ghost pain swept through him. When Himiko waved him over, Izuku started to get a little scared and seized the opportunity to flee. Since they wanted to keep it a secret for as long as possible and Aizawa was aware of how strong and dangerous that quirk was, he watched him leave without calling out. Furthermore, calling him out would have only made matters worse given how Iida and Bakugo are. Himiko reached over as soon as Izuku sat down and took his hand. It's okay, I'm here, and I'll always be here, Izu, she said kindly as she gave his hand a reassuring pat. Izuku gave her a small smile and gave her hand a gentle squeeze in return to express his gratitude. Naturally, she looked up to see his cheeks slightly flushed and a small smile on his face. With a promise to always be there to listen, care for, and love him without conditions, this made her heart skip a beat and make her want to lean over and give him a kiss. However, she set those thoughts aside because she knew he was still recovering and she didn't know the whole story. For the time being, she will continue to be his friend and support system when needed. Izuku grinned after receiving his summons, and Himiko saved him just as he was about to lose it. When he realized he was standing in front of the door he needed to go to, he was startled out of his reverie. As he lifted his arm to knock on the door was torn from its hinges by an explosion, and Izuku fell to the ground. A warm, soft body landed on top of him and began to feel him up. When Izuku opened his eyes slowly, he saw yellow cross-haired eyes and pink dreadlocks, as well as a hand feeling up his body. Totally unconcerned that she was pressing against him and feeling him up, she said, "Hi, my name is Mei Hatsume. What are you doing here, Muscles?" He stammered, still embarrassed, I'm here to see you for my costume," blushing like a madman. "Oh, I remember, I was working on it a bit and gave it some upgrades." Mei's eyes glowed instantly as she stood up and walked back into the room, Izuku trailing behind. "Upgrades?" he inquired bewilderedly. I've filled the armor with non-Newtonian fluid to absorb any impacts. I also made the leather armor be Kevlar and have small metal plates be inside of it to help protect you better. Rest of the outfit out of Kevlar to help protect you from cuts. Also I changed it up a bit so it's more resistant against fire, but still not fireproof, Mei replied. Izuku was taken aback, but he grinned slightly when he realized that this would better protect him. "Oh, I also added a hardened case to hold your phone, sketchpad and pencils on your right hip. Your left one has capture equipment and on your lower back, I added a hardened case that can hold basic medical supplies," Mei said with a grin. Feeling a little ashamed, he said, "Thank you Hatsume." Then she approached the table around which it was being worked on and showed it to him. "Wow, I really like this design. You made it look even better than I thought it'd look," Izuku replied. Before approaching him, she exclaimed, "Let's put it on you right now." "Well, as your supporter, it's my job to make my babies ready for hero work." Bewildered, he exclaimed, "Babies and huh? Come on, let's put this on you so I can see how cute my baby is," Mei said as she appeared in front of him and began attempting to take off his shirt. Before she could come up with a solution, Izuku swiftly pushed his shirt down and took a step back before he was leaning against the wall. She had begun to lift his shirt but stopped when she noticed the old scars on his stomach. Then, as memories of his past began to resurface in his mind, he sagged onto the ground and held himself. While Power and Maki were in the staff room elsewhere in Ua discussing testing and how everything would work with Nezu, Nightcrawler went right away and tried to console him. As soon as they sensed Izuku's anxiety beginning to increase, they both excused themselves and went to visit him. When he was back with Izuku, he was attempting to relax by breathing deliberately and receiving consolation from Nightcrawler. Mei had a rare epiphany, froze, and felt guilty at how he was responding. She approached him slowly, unsure of what to do. She took a seat in front of him and attracted his attention by softly touching his shoulder. "I'm sorry for doing that. I tend to get too excited about my babies and I tend to forget that it makes people uncomfortable," Mei said, taking a deep breath and meeting his bright green eyes. Although it took some time, Izuku was able to latch onto this and start to gradually calm down. He said, "It's okay, and I'm sorry why you had to see that." Mei nodded her head. "No, it's my fault and I'm sorry for doing that, and I promise not to do anything like that again, if you'll still have me as your supporter. I'll still keep you as it. I really like what you did with my costume," Izuku said, nodding his head and giving her a small smile. "Then in that case I'll make sure to make you the most amazing babies in the world," she said, beaming broadly as she got up and helped him up. Izuku had a fake smile on his face as he recalled this event, which occurred a few days ago and marked the start of his and Hatsume's friendship partnership. Given that they must be both comfortable and functional, he had the opportunity to wear his costume a few times and move around in it while providing her with feedback on what should be added or fixed to make it more comfortable. When Izuku sensed Himiko laughing at something Ochako said, he snapped out of his reverie. At the moment, She was seated on his lap, discussing something Izuku wasn't paying close attention to with Mina, Toru, and their new friend Sue. He was a little taken aback by Himiko's desire to sit on his lap, and when he asked her why, she pouted, kissed his forehead, and declared her love for him, letting him know that she was always available to him. Izuku smiled a little more before returning to his sketchbook and sketching what might have been a new summon. He was creating this one to hold his weapons in order to facilitate his fighting or drawing while engaged in combat. In another part of the room, Iida narrowed his eyes at the obvious physical affection between Himiko and Izuku. He wanted to correct them, but he knew that doing so would only make Izuku's friends yell at him. When he saw Himiko lean against Izuku after kissing his forehead, his scowl deepened. He gritted his teeth and remained silent because the teacher had defended them the last time. Iida wasn't the only person in the room who was upset with Izuku. Katsuki Bakugo was also glaring at Izuku with nothing but roiling resentment. As his hand unconsciously moved to his shoulder, which had been broken by that creature that Izuku had somehow created, he thought angrily, how the fuck did this bastard get a quirk? Not only that, but what the fuck was that thing? He hardened his glare even further, making it clear that he intended to kill, but before anyone could act, they all heard something. All Might yelled, "I am coming through the door." Like a hero, as he used so much force that he cracked the wall and tore the door off the railing. When the number one hero appeared in his Silver Age costume, everyone in the room was in awe. Denki exclaimed, "Holy crap, it's really All Might." The All Might, as she saw the world's and Japan's most popular hero for the first time. Momo remarked, "He's a lot taller in person," with genuine surprise. Kirishima said, "He's so manly." Himiko smiled as she turned to face Izuku, whose eyes were gleaming from seeing his favorite hero and personal icon. "Meh, I have my number one hero right here," she said. All Might grinned and said, "It's good to see you all today. Today we will be doing combat training. It will be a 2v2 situation. But before we can do that and be heroes, first you have to look your part." However, his gaze continued to go to Izuku and he continued to stare at him for longer than anyone else. Given that he had demonstrated the ability to use several quirks and appeared to be able to create people and creatures to aid him, he still didn't fully trust him. His professional demeanor returned quickly, and he grinned more broadly before pressing a button on a remote control that caused the wall to open up, revealing more than 20 suitcases with the words, "Grab your case and then head to the locker rooms near ground beta where we shall begin your training." Everyone hurriedly grabbed their cases and followed as All Might ran off, with Izuku trailing behind so he could change last and hide all of his scars. Izuku entered the dressing room last and started to undress and change in a more private area so that he wouldn't be seen by anyone entering and could easily hide or claim to be using the restroom because it's close enough. Everyone else in the briefing room was ogling each other's costumes and discussing them or the designs they were based on while he was doing that. Mina exclaimed, "Oh my god Himiko, your costume is so cute." As she observed it. After blushing slightly at the compliment, Himiko grinned broadly and said, "Thanks, I hope Izu likes it, he helped me with the base designs." After blushing slightly at the compliment, Himiko grinned broadly and said, "Thanks, I hope Izu likes it, he helped me with the base designs." She smiled as she spun around, saying, "Ah, now I wish I asked Midori for help with my costume, I would have loved to see his face." Hearing that, Ochako sulked a little and pondered in private what he would think of her outfit. Himiko looked around the room and asked, "Where's Izu by the way?" Kirishima remarked, "I believe he stated that he was still evolving." He's PR, Katsuki was about to make fun of him when the individual came in. Izuku entered the room and said, "Sorry everyone, was having some issues getting my gauntlets to click into place." He looked like a fantasy mage, and Himiko loved the way he looked. She instantly smiled and blushed more when she saw him. Others enjoyed the medieval style, particularly Ochako, Mina, and Toru. Tokiyami even gave him a nod of approval, though he thought it might be black. Himiko walked up to him and gave him a hug, saying, "Izu, it looks so good on you." Then she stepped back and gave him a little spin. "So, what do you think of mine?" she asked, blushing. Izuku was embarrassed to see how much he liked her costume, but he also blushed when he looked at it. He enjoyed the way it embraced her body and revealed a small portion of her abdomen. A certain midget in the room developed a perverted smile upon seeing all the girls' costumes, and he was about to approach to get a closer look when he sensed the death-like glare emanating from the crow that is constantly perched on Izuku's shoulder or close by. He was instantly alarmed by the glare and avoided it. Ahem, good, now that you're all here we can begin. The situation is that the villains and gotten a nuclear bomb and placed it somewhere in the building and is planning to nuke the city. The heroes will have to infiltrate the building and either touch the bomb or defeat the villains. The villains will have to either beat the heroes or stall them till the timer goes off, stated All Might. Sue put a finger to her chin and said abruptly, "This seems pretty American." Recalling what she had read about him, Mina remarked, "Well, he is a Japanese-American hero, so." Izuku nodded his head in remembrance of the fact that All Might had also spent 5 or 6 years in America and that his characteristics, particularly his attacks, had persisted ever since his return. All Might Sensei, what about the rules? As a hero we must always follow them to the letter. Iida suddenly screamed. Katsuki asked, "Can I kill or cripple my opponents?" in the hopes of facing Deku and putting the jerk back in his place. Before showing the board with everyone's names on it, All Might stated, "For rules, no moves that could cripple or kill someone is obvious. Also, if someone yields or surrenders you can't attack them and have to restrain them. If you break the rules then I'll personally step in and stop the fight. It will pick teams of 2 randomly and one will be the hero team while the other is the villain team." Before the first teams appeared, it shuffled around after the button was pressed. Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Iida are the antagonists, while Izuku Midoriya and Toru Hagakure are the heroes. Because they wanted to collaborate with him, Ochako and Mina pouted a little, but Himiko's pout got so bad that she embraced Izuku to keep him away from Toru. Toru smiled and said, "Hey Midoriya, I guess we are working together." Izuku glanced over to see her costume, which was just as vivid and colorful as Minas's. Izuku glanced over and saw that her costume was just as vivid and colorful as Mina's. He said, somewhat embarrassed, I guess we are. Himiko, could you please let me go so I can get ready for my fight?" She pouted as she looked up at him, but she gave in and let him go. She stepped back and looked at Bakugo as he hurried out of the room with Iida. She gave him a death glare, promising him nothing but suffering if he injured Izuku. Looking at her, he said, "Okay, so Hagakure, are you ready?" As they both went to stand outside the building, she nodded her head and smiled. Ochako asked in confusion, "Hey Himiko, why doesn't Izuku have power or that one girl with him to help him? Since he had called in allies to aid him in battle. He wants to prove to his summons that he's worthy. They all tell him that he is, but he doesn't feel like it. He feels like he relies on them for everything and that won't make him a good hero or master," Himiko stated with mixed emotions. Although they both whispered that to one another, a girl with earlobe jacks heard everything and scowled at the summoner and master in a little bewilderment. While Toru was stretching, she noticed that Izuku was also stretching and conversing with Nightcrawler about something. After a few more stretches, he got up and turned to face her. "So do you have any ideas for how you want to do this?" he inquired. Toru said, somewhat embarrassed, "No, not really. I've never been the best at strategizing, more of a just go with the flow type." "Oh, it's okay. Would you be okay if I tell you my idea and then you give me your input?" he replied. She nodded her head and grinned. As for their quirks, Iida has one similar to Ingenium, which means he depends heavily on speed, but unlike his brother, his thrusters are on his legs, which means that's his greatest strength and weakness. Well, to start, they probably put the bomb on the highest floor to make it harder for us to get it. Additionally, from what I can see, this building will have a lot of blind spots, so we will have to be careful going around corners as he ascends. Izuku stated, "He has speed on both of us, which means he has a huge advantage. We will either have to get him in a room with a lot of stuff in the way that prevents him from using said speed, or we will have to either trip him or, finally, and this is the one I'd like to avoid, outright fight him." Toru was astonished by his expertise and the ease with which he was explaining everything. "Next we need to deal with Bakugo. His quirk is explosion. He sweats nitroglycerin which causes explosions from his hands, and if I was to guess, his gauntlets serve more than just looks and actually help his quirk. I'll most likely have to be the one that faces him given I know exactly how his quirk works. Also be careful, since he won't hesitate to hurt you," Izuku said. Himiko, Ochako, and Mina were all pouting in the monitor room while he was telling Toru all of this, with Himiko's face being the most noticeable. "And start," All Might yelled abruptly. The raven nodded its head and took off, saying, "Nightcrawler, you know what to do." Izuku began to enter after saying, "Okay Toru, if we meet Bakugo first, which we probably will, I'll fight him while you go further up the stairs and try to take out Iida with your invisibility. Let's win this." She smiled and said, "Got it." As Izuku glanced at her and nodded his head, a small smile appeared on his lips. Leaning around corners to see if they could see him, they both started to ascend the stairs. They started to slip through the floor once more as they reached the third floor in order to reach the next flight of stairs, which were located elsewhere. Before they had gone very far down the hall, Bakugo appeared out of a corner and blasted a huge explosion in their direction. Izuku seized Toru right away and leapt back to shield him from the explosion. Mei also contributed to the improvement because of his armor. Without it, he might have suffered severe injuries. "Hagakure, go look for the bomb now," he exclaimed, getting back up and utilizing his body to protect her in case Bakugo attacked them in that manner once more. He grinned, knowing that he could now harm Deku without facing consequences. "Ha ha ha, who knew that Deku would use his worthless body to protect someone else? Guess you still a good punching bag," he said. "Hagakure, go," Izuku exclaimed. "All right," she exclaimed as she fled, turning invisible. Bakugo screamed, "Don't fucking ignore me, Deku," and launched himself at him with his explosions. Izuku only needed to wait a second for Bakugo to get close enough after he saw this and assumed his combat stance. Using Sebas' strength, he moved into his guard, grabbed Bakugo by the arm, and then twisted and threw him against the wall with such force that the wall broke and Bakugo fell to the floor of the empty room. He got up and turned to face the hole. He watched Deku come in and give him a stern look before he grabbed his book and opened it. When Katsuki saw this, he lunged for an attack, but Izuku was able to dodge him and speak to the book. Then a strange, worm-like creature with a yellowish-purple glow slowly crawled out of the book. It quickly climbed up Izuku's body and encircled him. It was a long, purple worm with feet that resembled suction cups. It once encircled Izuku's body, starting at his waist, before resting its head on his shoulder. There was also a human-like face on the worm. Izuku held his hand up to the worm's face and said, "Playful cloud." After that, the worm spat out a red bar, which Izuku carefully removed until he had the entire thing in his hands. He held one section in his right arm, the second in his left, and the third and last part dangled. Katsuki uttered the words, That thing is fucking ugly and disgusting," with disgust. The worm held its head down, looking hurt. Everyone in the observation room was repulsed by the object that Izuku had on him out of the blue and that spit out a Sanjiagan. However, 3 individuals in the room were thrilled about his plan to use the summon in his battle with Bakugo. Momo, who had previously trained with one of those and found it extremely difficult to use, was one of the people in the room who was genuinely interested. She stayed with the staff because, it's safe to say, she was fascinated to see someone use it in battle. Izuku gave Bakugo a fierce look before charging at him with unexpected speed once more, surprising Bakugo because he hadn't anticipated it. Izuku spun with the playful cloud, held one end, and once more used Sebas' strength to swing it with tremendous force and speed. Bakugo, seeing the blow coming, had to lift his left arm to block it, but the blow broke his gauntlet and sent him reeling backwards. Izuku then started to exert pressure, grabbing the middle part and spinning it so that Bakugo's left leg gave under him as the bottom part struck it. After a brief kick, Izuku swung the playful cloud once more, narrowly missing Bakugo, but the impact cracked the concrete. Bakugo let out a point-blank explosion to get some distance after growing tired of Deku striking him. Izuku was struck by the explosion, but his armor withstood it. He looked up to see Bakugo enter and unleash another blast. He rolled out of the way, thinking quickly, but was kicked in the chin, sending him reeling backward and confused. Izuku glanced up and saw Katsuki approaching, so he leapt aside and sent Nightcrawler a mental message. Bakugo was about to strike again when the windows behind him broke and the raven that Izuku always carries flew at him, striking him and sending him flying with unexpected force. After landing on Izuku's shoulder, Nightcrawler changed into his coat-like form, which immediately enabled him to levitate a little off the ground and cover Izuku's body. The blow landed after Izuku moved in and swung his playful cloud, but it came at the expense of an explosion that struck his armored chest, sending him hurtling through the wall and into the hallway. He gave up Sebas' strength for Nabaral's lightning and hurried back before landing again. When Bakugo flew out of the room, he saw Izuku's playful cloud covered in electricity and smashing into his head, dizzying him. However, Izuku had made at a tiny capsule, which opened up and caused the lightning to vanish as a hammer of blood formed. They both heard a sickening crack as one of Bakugo's ribs broke as the hammer crashed into his exposed side. Fuck you. Bakugo exploded a huge explosion at Izuku, and Nightcrawler barely managed to pull him away in time. Bakugo was panting from pain and exhaustion. With his house arrest and Quirk suppressant bracelet, it had been far too long since he had had the opportunity to train properly. Before glancing at his right gauntlet and smiling ominously, he said, "I think it's time we finish this, Deku. I'm sure you know how my quirk works, not only that but these gauntlets store my sweat," he said. When Izuku realized what he was talking about, his face began to turn pale. Bakugo smiled darkly as he raised his arm and took the pin off of it. All Might yelled, "Young Bakugo, stop, you might seriously injure him or worse." Bakugo yelled, "He'll be fine as long as he dodges," and pulled the pin, causing a huge explosion. Izuku's eyes widened in terror, and he raised his arms to protect his body. Both of his summons on him tried to protect him at once. Boom! Toru and Iida were knocked to the ground by the explosion, which was so powerful that the entire building trembled. The smoke took a minute to clear, but when it did, Izuku was visible. He was still standing, but his injuries were severe. His legs were also burned, and his arms were covered in burns from the explosion that destroyed his gauntlets, but the shrapnel from Bakugo's explosion destroyed a huge portion of his armor on his side. He was bleeding after the armor was torn apart and a sizable area of his skin was burned and sliced. Izuku felt blood seeping out of his hand as he slowly lowered it to his side. The pain started to overwhelm him, and he collapsed to his knees. He walked forward and kicked Izuku hard in the chest, sending him flying back and landing on the ground in agony. "Ha ha 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 ha, I fucking told you, Deku. You can't beat me, you're worthless fuck," he said with a laugh. Everyone in the observation room was silent, utterly shocked, and appalled that Bakugo would act in such a manner. Mina and Ochako were both covering their mouths in horror at Izuku's injuries when Ochako caught sight of something. Himiko had left. Before leaving to go destroy Toru and win this game, Bakugo growled, "Now drop out and leave this school for heroes, you worthless Deku." However, as he took a few more steps, the hairs on his body stood on end, and he turned around in a hurry, only to have his right arm immobilized by a knife that went straight through his shoulder. After being tackled to the ground, he raised his arm, but as it attempted to reach his eye, another knife stabbed through his hand. In addition to wanting him to suffer for what he had just done to Izuku, Himiko was furious above him and realized who he was based on his behavior around him. He was one of the tormentors of Izuku. Bakugo attempted in vain to stop the blade as it began to approach his head, but her strength was unexpectedly incredible. With unbridled bloodlust, she uttered, "You hurt him. You're the reason he has so much trauma and has suffered. You fucking cunt, get off me, and what I did to that worthless fuck is none of your business and you should be thanking me for putting him in his place." When he saw the expression in her eyes after he said that, a fear of death spread throughout his body. She was going to cause him pain and kill him. Himiko, Izuku said. She turned to see Izuku leaning against the wall with capture tape on him after being abruptly jolted out of her bloodlust. Her instincts told her to jump back before she could comprehend why, but a big hand stopped her and captured her on tape as she attempted to do so. All Might glared at the three, especially Himiko and Izuku, and said, "Training is terminated for today. All three of you go to the nurse's office as I talk to Mr. Aizawa." He added, "Also call off your dog." Before he felt liquid strike his shoulder and looked up, Katsuki was perplexed. He then experienced another wave of fear. Above him was the head of a huge fox, but it had many eyes and was prepared to strike at any time. He tried to mentally calm her and his other summons by saying, "K-Kon, calm down, it's okay." Considering that they were all psychologically connected to Izuku and that everything that had just transpired. They desired Bakugo's blood. Bakugo and Izuku were both going to the medical wing to recover, but Recovery Girl, knowing Izuku's history, put them in different rooms right away. She didn't begin healing Izuku until a blonde she knew would be arriving kicked in the door. "Where's my master?" Tsunade asked, her eyes narrowing. She then turned to see Izuku lying in the bed with fresh burns on his arms, legs, and stomach, but the shrapnel had caused the worst burns on his side and stomach. She moved in and said, "I'll handle it from here. I don't mean to offend, but..." With a tone of disgust, She said, "It's okay, I understand. While you heal him, I'll heal the other." She didn't even want to use her quirk on him. When Tsunade saw that her master had been harmed once more, she looked down at him and her eyes lowered slightly in sorrow. She quickly shook her head and started healing him while the other summons he had Medea Euro, Power, Maki, and Lupus Regina Euro, were on their way to Nezu's office. They were standing guard outside the door. Anyone wishing to harm their master would have to pass them. Izawa yelled at the top hero, "For the last time, no All Might, we are not expelling them." With a rare look of rage that he had never displayed before. Young Midoriya has a strange quirk. It allows him to use other powers and even create people or things. He needs to be more supervised or thrown in jail to be questioned. For Toga, she tried to kill a student with her blade. "I saw the look in her eyes. She wanted to kill young Bakugo," stated All Might. "Izuku doesn't need to be monitored," he declared, "and if you read both of their files then you'd understand why she defended him like that. Given her quirk and mental trauma at a young age, she's very attached to Izuku and he helps keep her sane and stable enough for her to live in society," Izawa responded. Although he detested having to put it that way, Hound Dog had told him the truth following a session to assess her mental health. She is literally held together by Izuku, and as long as he is present and gives her his blood, she will be alright. Unfortunately, it served as yet another illustration of the negative aspects of quirk society and how people perceive others based solely on their peculiarities. "No one is getting expelled today," said Nezu that caught their attention. "Izuku has done nothing wrong and like I told you All Might, read his profile so you understand. Also Izawa bring Bakugo here once he's healed enough." He broke his final warning with how he was acting in that training scenario, so now he has to be reminded that now if he does anything, he is gone and I won't hesitate to remove him and give him to the authorities. All Might asked in confusion, "Wait, what did young Bakugo do to hit that?" "This is why I said read their profiles so you understand," Nezu replied. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation, and Nezu pressed a button on his desk, causing it to swing open, revealing Sebas and several other summons Izuku had, mostly his battle maids, but also Khan herself, who was depicted on the table as a tiny fox head. Sebas walked right by the heroes, but his gaze remained fixed on All Might, and the butler's glare made even the number one shiver. "Before you say anything Sebas, don't worry, he will be punished accordingly. He will still be here, but now his leash will be so tight that if he so much as scratches his nose wrong, we'll expel him," Nezu replied. Sebas widened his eyes and nodded. "I'm not only here for that, but to inform you of something else. If he or anyone else here hurts our master again, your staff won't be able to stop us from what we do to that student or teacher." "Are you threatening students?" All Might asked, glancing down at the butler, making his presence known once more right away. "I'm stating a fact, he's our master and as his summons. Those that hurt our master deserve the same type of pain they inflicted on him," Sebas said, turning to glare at the top hero as the battle maids prepared to charge in and fight and Khan herself prepared to do the same. All Might was shocked to learn that these individuals, whom he believed to be under Izuku's control, were escaping punishment for merely threatening to harm a student. Furthermore, neither Himiko nor Izuku were being punished or even looked into in Izuku's case. Himiko would only be tested to determine her mental state because she was more than willing to kill Bakugo. Given everything Nezu had said, including his repeated insistence that he read their profiles to find out more about them, but that he needed to get in touch with someone first, he left the office with a lot to think about. He needed to discuss Izuku with Night Eye in order to hear what his former sidekick had to say about him and perhaps use his quirk to determine whether he posed a threat. Izuku was still unconscious in the bed in Recovery Girl's office while Tsunade was tending to his injuries from his earlier altercation with Bakugo. She found it difficult to control her rage at the man for what he had done to Izuku. However, she inhaled deeply, composed herself, and proceeded to heal his wounds. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Himiko sitting beside Izuku's bed, holding his hand tenderly with both of hers. Seeing him in pain and now not responding made her look so lost and hurt. Given the harm her biological family had done to her, Tsunade sighed sorrowfully, knowing how much Himiko needed Izuku. She loved him and needed him to help stabilize her mental state. If Izuku hadn't met her, become friends with her the way he did, and given her blood whenever she needed it, who knows what might have happened to her. He genuinely cared about her and made an effort to make her happy, which made Tsunade happy and a little envious because it demonstrated that he still had the heart of a hero in spite of everything that had happened to him. She gently squeezed Izuku's hand with Himiko in the hopes that he would awaken, but he was still unconscious because Tsunade had placed him in a medically induced coma to hasten his recovery. She then glanced up at his attractive face and gave him a small smile while gently brushing some hair away from his eyes. However, as she did so, she noticed something in the corner of her eye that was obscured by his long hair. Though Himiko couldn't see it clearly, it appeared to be a tiny tattoo on his temple. She was startled out of her reverie before she could look any farther when they all heard a knock on the door. "Who is it?" Tsunade asked, her eyes narrowing a little. Through the door, Sebas said, "It's me." "Come in then," Tsunade said. After Sebas, Yuri, Lupus Regina, Nabarl, and Intoma opened the door. The house was being guarded by the other battle maids. Knowing how defensive her sisters could become, Yuri stepped forward and asked, "Tsunade, is our master okay?" In an attempt to calm them. She sighed with relief as she said, "Yes, I just finished healing him, and thankfully, there will be no long-lasting effects or scars on his body." "That is very good to hear. Also, we have a car ready and I believe we should leave. Our master's mother is very worried after being told what happened today," Sebas replied. Tsunade gave a nod, and Himiko grudgingly released Izuku and retreated as Sebas approached and picked him up gently before he started to walk toward the car, all the summonses around him making it obvious that they would protect Izuku and harm anyone who threatened his life. Maki, who had a frown on her face from what she felt her master go through and could clearly see it through their connection, followed Himiko as they walked. Before everyone but Nightcrawler, Nabarl, Lupus Regina, Maki, and Sebas summoned themselves to sit comfortably in the spacious car, they had already left the building and were ready to get inside. Izuku's face began to twitch as Sebas put him in the back seat, indicating that he was beginning to awaken. After driving for a few minutes, his eyes gradually opened to reveal that he was in a car with a warm object against him. He slowly turned his head to see Himiko embracing him firmly while threatening to cry. He moved his arm slowly and gave her a gentle hug, which caused her to jump a little and look up when she saw his smile. "Hey Himiko. Sorry about the fight," he responded. She leaned closer to him and said, "No, it's okay. It wasn't your fault." He put his arm gently on her back to hold her and enjoy the comfort of her hug, which nearly made him forget how touch-starved they both were. "Himiko, if possible, CC could. We keep doing this for a while, even when we get home." He was embarrassed. "Yes, we can do this as much as you want," she said, grinning broadly as her cheeks flushed and she gave him a slightly tighter hug while listening to his heartbeat. He uttered the words, "Thank you Himiko," as his chest warmed. While they were discussing this, Izuku was unaware that Nightcrawler had left with a small envelope that had been given to him and was on his way to the Bakugo residence to deliver it to Katsuki's parents before the school itself informed them of what had transpired. Since all of the battle maids were seated outside the room watching the door, Izuku's room was now essentially the safest place in Japan. However, some of them were sulking with jealousy over what was happening in his room. To Izuku's shame, he was lying on his bed with his head resting on Himiko's thighs while she caressed his hair tenderly in an attempt to reassure him and prevent panic attacks in light of Katsuki's actions earlier in the day. As she continued to caress his hair and relish having his head rest on her lap, Himiko grinned broadly. She looked down at Izuku and asked, "Are you feeling any better, Izuku?" With his head resting on her lap, he said, a little flustered, "Yeah. I'm feeling a lot better Himiko, thank you for helping me. You're my best friend Izuku, and I love you, and I'd do anything to help you and make you happy," she said, blushing as she leaned down to kiss his bead and giggled softly. Izuku gazed up at her, into her honey yellow eyes with slitted pupils, and he vowed that the tender glance she was giving him made his heart skip a beat. In order to prepare some food for everyone tonight, Inko, who was elsewhere in the mansion, pushed away the chef that Izuku had made. This was necessary because all of the summons that typically stayed out of Izuku's body needed something to keep them going, or else they would deplete his own energy, give him terrible headaches, and leave him exhausted. Knowing that Himiko was reassuring Izuku and ensuring his happiness in spite of everything they had both experienced today made her smile broadly as she prepared dinner. Then her thoughts shifted to something else. Bakugo Katsuki, Mitsuki. What went wrong with raising that boy? Sure, he was rough around the edges when he was young, but he was never like this, she thought to herself. After everything her son had done to Izuku, she missed her best friend terribly. She stopped talking to her, and she has no idea how they themselves responded. She let out another sigh and carried on preparing the stew she had chosen, all the while wondering in private how Mitsuki was truly doing and whether or not things would soon improve even more for Izuku. A big gate with even bigger cracks than before was back with Izuku in his summon world. As the lone Red-Eye gazed out into the more open summon world, a sense of dread and pure primal fear seeped through the gate, despite the Nazgul's best efforts to keep the monsters behind it at bay. As they were making their way to Ua after being dropped off by Sebas a short distance away due to the traffic, Himiko said, "Izuku, are you sure you're going to be okay for today? Aizawa called your mom and said we could stay home if you wanted to." Earlier in the morning, when he asked her what the box in her hand on the other side of him was, she simply blushed and told him he would have to wait. In order to check on Izuku, Nightcrawler turned its head. He glanced at her and said, "Don't worry, Himiko. I'm fine. In addition, I can't keep letting Bakugo rule my life. I need to get stronger, and I can't do that if I skip school." To demonstrate that she was there for him, she nodded her head before stepping closer and leaning against him. She was also delighted that he didn't recoil or stop her. Instead, he gave her permission to do so. As they rounded the final bend in the road, they could now see the entire Ua campus, but there was a crowd of hundreds of reporters in front of it. "What's going on?" Izuku asked, perplexed by the large number of reporters in front of Ua. Given what the hero did yesterday, Himiko's tone was a little bit biting as she said, "Perhaps they heard that All Might is here." Izuku remarked, "I mean, that would make the most sense." As they approached, several reporters noticed them, surrounded the two of them right away, and started asking them a ton of questions. "Did you meet All Might? What is All Might like as a teacher? Do you think All Might will be as good of a teacher as he is a hero?" As they all persisted in asking them questions, Izuku's anxiety was getting worse and memories of his previous school began to swirl in his head. Himiko saw this right away and realized that in order to protect Izuku, she needed to act before one of his summonses, summon themselves, and possibly cause harm to someone. She seized Izuku's hand right away, interlocking her fingers with his, and dragged him through the throng, pushing people if needed and ignoring their ire. When she got to the gate, she brought Izuku with her and swiftly swiped her ID card on the scanner to open the door. As the reporters attempted to cram themselves inside once more, Aizawa showed up with a gloomy expression. With his quirk coming into play, he growled at them, frightening them before the gate slammed shut, saying, "All of you leave now, you're interrupting my students." But before it did, he noticed a frightening set of red eyes that were leaking bloodlust and staring at him. He turned to see that Himiko and Nightcrawler were attempting to ease Izuku's anxiety from the large crowd. "I'll need to tell Nezu to up the security system just in case," he said. As he approached them, he asked, "Midoriya, are you feeling better?" "Why yes. Just need a second. I'm not used to being surrounded by people," he replied. He uttered the words, "makes sense," without knowing how to proceed. After a minute, Izuku finally calmed down enough for him and Himiko to begin walking to class, with Aizawa trailing a few feet behind them so that he wouldn't be bothered if they needed to talk about anything. Listening in, "Izuku, are you sure you're doing okay?" Himiko asked softly. With a slight smile, he said, "Yeah, I assure you that I'm fine, Himiko. Don't worry." "All right," she said, "but I'm available if you need to talk." When they finally came to the door of Class 1A, Izuku nodded his head and went to open it to find that nearly everyone was seated or conversing with one another. The most notable, however, was Bakugo, who was ignoring everyone else in the room and glaring out the window while wearing his quirk suppressant bracelet again. As they passed their friends, Izuku and Himiko said hello to them as they made their way to their seats and took a seat. Everyone took their seats and turned to face Aizawa, who was giving them all his characteristic blank stare. "Good, now that we are all here, I'll go over what happened yesterday, then you can have the rest of this hour to yourselves. I need to talk to Nezu about some stuff and make sure those reporters don't do anything stupid," said Aizawa prior to taking out a pile of newspapers. "First off, to start with, Midoriya, you did a very good job during your fight, but you relied too heavily on your support weapon and once you were thrown off balance, you started to lose. Work on making sure you use your quirk to its full extent and always have backup plans if your main strategy fails," Aizawa said. He reflected on his altercation once more and said, "I understand, sir, and I'll do that." "Hagakure, You did a good job sneaking up to the room with the bomb, but you didn't know what to actually do given the floor was covered in broken glass since Iida planned ahead for your strategy. Go to your supporter and request something that will allow you to fight at a distance or something that will open more options of combat for you, Aizawa said. Since she was ill-prepared for that and Iida managed to keep the bomb away from her the entire time, she said, I understand Aizawa-sensei, I'll make sure to fix that. Now for Iida. Your strategy was good, but only useful against Hagakure. If it was Midoriya who showed up then it would have been completely useless, Aizawa responded. Also don't think everything by the book and think outside the box. Aizawa interrupted Iida, saying, but sir, the book about basics of Hero Straw, I told you to think outside the box Iida. Since he had read the book on hero strategy to the point where he understood every word and how they couldn't fail, he simply nodded his head and looked down in anger. Aizawa said, now for you Bakugo, in a tone that even caused him to wince a little. You were very reckless and went way too far in your fight, using excessive force with your explosions along with using those gauntlets and doors. If it wasn't for Midoriya's armor then he might have been even more injured or worse killed from that explosion you caused, he stated with widened eyes. Because of that, your gauntlets will be taken away and you shall be severely punished, with your parents being informed of everything you did. Katsuki clenched his jaw in fury. He was destined to become the next big hero. He was simply putting Deku in his proper place, so it didn't matter if he hurt that worthless bastard. Now for Himiko, he said, recognizing that she still didn't have a new last name and that she detests being called by her last name. While what you did was wrong given you tried to seriously hurt Bakugo, I can't deny that it was to protect Midoriya, so all I'll say is learn to think more rationally and don't let your emotions control you. She remarked, I understand Aizawa-sensei. Good, now since the rest of you didn't get to participate in that training exercise given what happened, you shall all go through it sometime later this week, anyways do whatever you want within reason for the hour. I have to go talk to Nezu, said Aizawa prior to leaving the space, but did not the entrance. Oh also before lunch, decide who will be your class and vice president also Bakugo come with me, and he left the space. Bakugo gritted his teeth and trailed after him. Everyone immediately started to form friend groups and engage in conversation, with the exception of Iida, who tried to get everyone to vote right away but was ignored, so he turned to his book before he could take the commotion any longer and started berating everyone. Izuku was about to take out his sketchbook when he was distracted by Himiko's prodding of his arm. She smiled with fangs and said, come on, let's talk to Ochako, Mina, and Toru. He nodded and smiled before putting his sketchbook away and moving his chair over to them. To his surprise, Asui, if he remembered correctly, and Yaoyorozu joined them. Additionally, he saw that Kirishima sat next to Mina to speak with her and that Tokiyami was in the vicinity. Mina smiled broadly, her cheeks a very fake purple, and she said, Hi Midori, how are ya? With a slight smile, Izuku reached up and scratched beneath the raven's chin, causing it to croon with joy. Oh, I'm doing really good, Himiko really helped me along with Nightcrawler and the others at my home, he said. That's good to hear, also you did an amazing job, I've never seen someone use a strange weapon like that before, Ochako replied. Oh well that's thanks to Maki who taught me how to use it, it's very hard to learn how to fight effectively with it, but once you learn how, then it's much easier and more useful in a fight than you'd think, Izuku with a smile. Kirishima grinned and said, bro, it was really manly to watch you fight with that thing so easily. Oh, I'm Ajiro Kirishima. It's good to meet you, he said, extending his hand. Izuku said, it's nice to meet you too, Kirishima, with a small smile and a handshake. Toru looked down and said, Midoriya. Sorry I wasn't very helpful during the test. He grinned and scratched his cheek as he said, no, you were helpful, Hagakure. If it weren't for you pursuing Iida and keeping him occupied, who knows what might have happened. Toru averted her gaze and began to fiddle with a lock of her hair. Gotta admit my favorite part of that whole fight was you kicking temper tantrum's ass, stated Kyoka. Izuku turned to face that girl, who had a slight smirk on her face and was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite put his finger on. Kyoka Jiro, she said, waving lazily as her left jack continued to do the same, which Izuku had to admit was rather adorable. He turned his head to face the woman with the long black obsidian hair, the stunning face, and the mature body before he could say anything else. Hello. Momo blushed in shame at doing something like that after realizing she had been staring at him and blinking a few times. My apologies, I was listening to you talk and kept thinking over your fight, and before I knew it, I just started to stare at you," Momo apologized. "Oh, it's okay, I've done that before too," he replied. "So, did you need something since you were looking at me for so long?" he replied. "Oh yes, I was really curious about how you learned to use that weapon so expertly. I've had senseis before who tried to teach me and all I ended up doing was smacking myself with it hard," she replied. "I had a very good teacher. She was a bit strict and hated to pull punches, but she taught me well, and thanks to that I learned how to use the Sanjiagen, or as I call mine, Playful Cloud," stated Izuku. Her eyes suddenly took on a slightly calculating expression as she exclaimed, "Wow, that truly is amazing. Also, I saw that you almost beat my score on the written test for the entrance exam." Izuku became a little anxious about that when he noticed something a folded chess board in the corner of his eye. He politely asked, Yaoyorozu, would you like to continue this over a game of chess?" "Sure, Midoriya, I'd love to play a game. It's been a couple months since I last played," she said, her eyes widening slightly before a tiny smile appeared on her face. Izuku grinned and reached for the board, then he put the pieces down and they began to play while conversing. Himiko, who was pouting next to him, was experiencing some conflict at the moment. She was both pleased and envious that Izuku was making new friends, but they were women. Tokiyami was attempting to speak to Dark Shadow as the large group conversed with one another while Izuku and Momo played chess. He finally addressed the small wisp that was his peculiarity, asking, "What's wrong? Why aren't you coming out?" At last, he said, Because Midoriya scares me." "But why do you fear him? He may have darkness, but we live in it," confounded Tokiyami, who was unable to understand why Dark Shadow would be afraid of him. He sounded even more terrified as he said, "And no, he is darkness. I feel so much dread, rage, fear, and carnage coming from him, it's almost suffocating." Tokiyami glanced up at Izuku slowly, and although he couldn't see it, Dark Shadow made him feel it more and more the longer he looked. Midoriya was home to a dark force that craved blood. Then he noticed something else in Izuku's shadow, which intensified his emotions. Gradually, the shadow began to take on the appearance of a skeletal monster with two enormous horns. Tokiyami felt as though he was filled with nothing but fear and despair when he saw the piercing red eyes as the creature's head slowly turned towards him. However, it vanished as quickly as it had appeared, forcing Tokiyami to catch his breath. As he did, he noticed that his hands were shaking uncontrollably in terror. Whatever that is, the problem is, he wants to stay as far away from it as possible. Iida, who was across the classroom, finally finished berating Denki and Mineta for discussing something as obscene as who was the most beautiful. It was his responsibility to put into practice the idea that school was only for learning and not for that kind of thing. His gaze then shifted to Izuku and Himiko, who narrowed their eyes as he tried to figure out why Bakugo was punished while they were not for so flagrantly breaking the rules. He returned to his book while gritting his teeth and secretly considering ways to expel these two troublemakers, particularly since Himiko's constant flirting with Izuku damaged UA's reputation as the school of heroes. Shigaraki was standing in the crowd near the gate, slowly making his way closer while being careful not to draw attention to himself. However, as he moved, he recalled the discussion he had with his master. If you want to attack Ua and strike somewhere hard, then destroy the gate, leaving an opening for Kurogiri to steal the files of the class's schedules. Also try and find a file about a student named Izuku Midoriya. My spy has informed me that his quirk is different, stated all for one. Shigaraki narrowed his eyes when he was bumped into, but he was powerless to stop it and continued to creep toward his target. Time passed quickly, and before they knew it, lunchtime had arrived. However, the teachers were so preoccupied with their meeting that Class 1A and Class B had essentially 2 hours of free time, and lunch was about to start. It was a never-ending back and forth with the final 4 pieces on the board, and Izuku and Momo have been at a standstill for the last half hour on this particular game because neither of them could move a piece too far on the board without losing it. Izuku and Momo had 2 each, and although neither of them wanted to give up, they knew they had to given the circumstances. Momo smiled slightly and said, "All right, Midoriya, let's call it a draw." "Good idea," Izuku said with a smile and a nod, ignoring the envious looks he was receiving from Himiko, Ochako, Mina, and Toru. How were you two able to make that match so long and interesting yet boring at the same time, replied Kyoka. They exchanged glances before each of them shrugged. Midoriya, if you wouldn't mind, could I maybe visit you at your home so you and your sensei could teach me more with close combat? My senseis are good, but my father won't let them actually train me so they have to go easy on me all the time, Momo said, a little embarrassed at the end, after turning to face him again. His gaze shifted to Himiko, who grinned and gave him the thumbs up. However, as soon as he turned away, a demon materialized behind her, and Ochako felt that Himiko had grown demonic horns out of jealousy. Iida yelled at the top of his lungs, "Everyone, I need your attention." Which caused everyone to turn to stare at him in frustration. We need to decide who shall be class president and vice president. Because of this I recommend that we do a democratic vote, or better yet a democratic socialist vote, so we are all equal and the leaders shall lead us, he stated. Instead of lighting that other powder keg, everyone just agreed to hold a democratic vote. 5 minutes later, Midoriya Izuku, 8, Momo Yaoyorozu, 4. Izuku's jaw was on the floor after witnessing that, and he wondered silently who it was. His train of thought was interrupted when he saw Himiko wave at him with a nagged grin. He thought, well, that's one person. Not wanting to deal with that kind of pressure, he said, if possible I'd like to hand my position to Yaoyorozu-san, since I believe she'd be a much better class president than I ever could. I will, as long as you're my vice president. I think you'd fit in that role very well, Momo said, looking at him with a slight astonishment that he would offer her the position he had won. He nodded his head reluctantly because he didn't want to be the focus of the class for very long. Bakugo gritted his teeth and glared hatefully at the staff and his so-called parents, saying, "What the fuck? Like I said, you are now on an even shorter leash, Katsuki. You will be required to live on the campus for now on, and when here in school you shall be escorted to each class or to your room with a member of staff or a third year," Nezu replied. He looked at his parents once more before lowering his gaze to the papers in front of him as his teeth began to grind so loudly and painfully that blood began to trickle from his gums. In addition to that, his parents were divorcing each other. However, they were disowning him, which meant that he was no longer a Bakugo and that they were no longer his legal guardians. Because of everything Katsuki did and the fact that he never changed, his parents were so distressed and hurt that they began to argue loudly and separate. Even though they both detested it, it all came back to Katsuki. Given everything Katsuki had done, neither of them could tolerate the other's presence, and despite everything, he remained the same. Since they used to love Katsuki and each other more than anything else, it was extremely painful for both Masaru and Mitsuki. However, now, since the teen in front of them wasn't their son, they no longer wanted to be close to Katsuki or each other. He was someone else entirely. "This is fucking stupid. I didn't do anything wrong," screamed Katsuki, furious that his parents were behaving this way after he replaced him with a peculiar Deku. "And here you are thinking you have everything, yet you pushed us to the point that now," Mitsuki said in agony as she looked up at him through tears. "You have nothing, and you're not my son." She then turned and left, doing her best not to cry, but it was getting harder and harder, so she just went to her now empty house and drank wine and the scotch Masaru forgot to help her cope with her pain. Everyone left the cafeteria to wait in line for food, with the exception of Himiko and Izuku, who insisted on sitting first. He looked at her and said, "So what is it you wanted to show me, Himiko?" She smiled and opened the package she had, revealing 2 tiny wooden boxes, but she was apprehensive because she had never done this before and sincerely hoped Mama Inko was telling the truth. She pulled one out and handed it to Izuku, then opened it to reveal that it was a lunchbox she had constructed on her own with Inko's help. She blushed in shame and said, I hope you like it." When Izuku saw the food in front of him, his eyes widened. It appeared to be comparable to bento boxes that could feed 3 people for the same price. Himiko. "TT, this looks amazing," he exclaimed, unable to believe what he was seeing. She blushed and turned her head away as her heart grew larger and the words Inko had spoken returned to her. "I know my son has never been one to judge food that much, but if he's anything like his father, if you make him a good meal he'll fall in love with you a whole lot faster, since the fastest way to man's heart is through his stomach," Inko said as she helped her prepare the food. Try it," she said, her cheeks growing redder as she watched him hopeful. "Itadakimasu," was said by Izuku after he nodded his head, put his hands together, and then picked up a piece of tempura shrimp with chopsticks and consumed it. His eyes widened after he chewed it for a moment, then he turned to face her and noticed her anxious expression. This is really good, like on par with my mom's home-cooked meals. When she heard that, she started eating her own food with a big smile on her face because Izuku loves her cooking. If you want I can make you more for lunch. She asked. He said uneasily, why you don't have to, because he didn't want to exploit her generosity or her affection for him. No, I want to, it makes you happy and it doesn't bother me in the slightest, it makes me happy knowing that I can make you something, she replied. If you're sure, he said, grinning and nodding his head. As they looked up, Mina, Ochako, Toru, Momo, Kyoka, Kirishima, Tokiyami, and Sue joined them at the big table they were seated at. They kept eating, but soon after, other people joined them. Mina was shocked to see how good his food looked and said, wow, Midoriya, that looks amazing. Where did you get that? I made it, Himiko declared, her smile appearing sweet and innocent to the other girls. They observed her staking her claim and grinning malevolently. When some of the girls saw the lunch she had prepared, an idea came to them all. Should they prepare lunch and give Izuku some of it? Ochako exclaimed, wow, she had never seen anything look that good and was genuinely astounded by the food's appearance considering how impoverished her family is and how they have always had to purchase the least expensive items. After that, she glanced down at her own lunch, which was one of the options available to students who couldn't really afford it. It consisted of a bowl of miso soup, steamed rice, fried fish, and a tiny cucumber salad. She started eating as she watched everyone converse, grinning pitifully but completely. They continued to converse with Kirishima, who then went on to describe his friendship with Mina and how they had been friends since they were young until he had to relocate, which caused them to be apart for some time. Izuku listened intently before turning to face Ochako and choosing to be kind by putting some of his tempura shrimp and fried chicken on her tray. The words, I thought you might wanna try some, came to mind as Ochako looked at him with wide eyes and a smile. She thanked him while blushing and looking down. She took a bite and nearly groaned at how delicious it was. It's the best thing she's ever eaten. When Himiko saw this, she simultaneously grinned and pouted. Izuku was about to ask who had voted for him to be the class president after looking at them all when an alarm began to sound. Kirishima asked, looking around in confusion, what's going on? Hey, what the heck is going on? Kyoka yelled at a third-year student after becoming irritated with the commotion. The third-year student gave her a frustrated and anxious look before he fled, saying, someone has broken into UA, we have to get out of here and leave it for the teachers to deal with. With a snarly, irritated tone, she remarked, wow, what a great example for the younger students. Iida was attempting to shout orders, but he was swiftly trampled underfoot by everyone and vanished into the crowd. Everyone, we must leave in an orderly fasaaah. Izuku and the others were attempting to depart, but they were being overtaken by the terrified crowd. Himiko exclaimed, ow, as she was pushed away from Izuku and began to feel overpowered by everyone's attention. When he saw this, he exclaimed, Himiko, and reached for her, but he was pushed farther away. Izuku became enraged as he got farther away and watched her being jostled, which his summons was beginning to sense. Nightcrawler instantly transformed into his coat form, and Izuku soared above the crowd before he took Himiko's hand and, to her delight and to shield her from the crowd, drew her close to him in a princess carry. Momo, holding a megaphone on the window ledge, yelled, everyone stop. Look outside and see for yourself. We are UA students, and it's just the media. Fortunately, the crowd halted and turned to see that she was correct and that only the media had entered the gate. She was delighted that they listened to her and started to follow her instructions. Go back to your lunch tables or classes and wait for the bell or the staff to dismiss us, she said. Himiko pouted when Izuku hovered over to her and put her down, saying, wow. Yaoyorozu, that was amazing. It was nothing, I just didn't want anyone to get hurt, she stated. He smiled slightly and remarked, you did a good job, but it was quick thinking. Momo pushed aside the slight warmth in her cheeks and grinned at him, saying, thank you, Midoriya. Himiko's eyebrows twitched, and she gave Momo the stink eye while protectively hugging Izuku. Momo swore she saw her bare her teeth. After yesterday's whole ordeal, the students were sent home early on the following day of classes because some members of the media had broken into the building to speak with the students. Naturally, this gave Uwa the legal authority to sue them, which Nezu intended to do, and completely destroy them. However, in Class 1A, Izuku was sketching two human figures in his sketchbook, one of whom was female and the other male. The female one was encircled by chains, had red hair, and was dressed in what appeared to be a suit and school uniform. There were tiny animals all around the male, and appeared more typical and wore a long-sleeved white dress shirt over a dark blue jacket. His uniform pants, which match his jacket, are more baggy at the bottom and only reach his ankles. Izuku was about to continue drawing when a blonde vampire sitting in his lap nuzzled closer, her long blonde hair slightly intruding into his face. This pulled Izuku out of his drawing zone. He simply made the decision to put his drawing on hold for the time being in order to spend more time with his new friends. Two students were glaring at Izuku from the other side of the room, one with pure hatred and the other with frustration and rage. Himiko was sitting on Izuku's lap, being all cuddly and touchy here at school, and Iida couldn't stand it. The other student, Katsuki, was glaring at Izuku and Himiko for what they had done to him. He wouldn't be punished for demeaning strange people if it weren't for them, especially Deku. Furthermore, his own parents would not have disowned him. His quirk was suppressed as he gritted his teeth and noticed that his bracelet was glowing in light. After a few minutes, Aizawa walks into the classroom and pauses at the door. She notices that everyone is seated, but Himiko is bending over and playing with Izuku's hair. He walked to his desk and looked at the class before saying, "It looks like you all know to be in your seats ahead of time. That's good. Now I have an announcement. In a little while we shall be leaving for the USJ to do rescue training for unforeseen accidents." He then produced a remote control and pressed a button, causing the wall to open once more and revealing the suitcases so that everyone could don their superhero outfits. "Wear your hero suit if you want to, or don't, it doesn't matter to me, just meet me at the front gate in 10 minutes, he said before turning his gaze to Izuku. "Midoriya, your suit is ready as well." After he left, Izuku became perplexed because his was seriously damaged. He got up and went to where his suitcase was, then picked it up and opened it to discover that a costume was inside. Then he noticed a note on the corner and started reading it. "Greetings, Izuku. This is May. I quickly made you a new suit, which isn't as sturdy as your old one but will last until I make you a new one or fix the baby. I added more items to your belt after seeing your fight, and this baby right here has less armor, which allows you more mobility but less protection. Soon to be the greatest supporter in the world is Mei Hatsume." Izuku gave a small smile before heading out to change. For the 10th time in the previous 4 minutes, Aizawa's eyebrows twitched. Iida was attempting to direct everyone and instruct them to form a neat line for the bus, but nobody was paying attention and instead they were chatting among themselves. When he saw green, he saw Izuku running toward them, and farther away, he saw Maki and Power gradually approaching. He simply assumed that they were there to keep Izuku safe, especially in light of Tuesday's events. When Izuku and the others finally showed up, Himiko asked if this was his suit. He simply replied that it was a temporary one until his real one was fixed. It was a dark green suit with little to no armor, and it looked like a medieval adventurer from a fantasy television program, just like his old one. When the final pupils arrived, Momo went to the front and cleared her throat before saying, "Okay, everyone, board the bus and select a seat once you get on." Iida stared in shock that he had once again been disregarded as they all listened to her and began to make their way to the bus. Izuku boarded and was ready to settle in when Mina and Ochako both took hold of his hands and motioned for him to sit beside them. Despite feeling a little uneasy and ashamed, he consented before joining them for a seat. Himiko smirked confidently as she approached Izuku, sat in his lap once more, and relished the sulky looks she was receiving. Momo, Sue, and Toru were on the opposite side of them, and she was also sulking a little. Katsuki was happy that no one sat next to him because they had a seat available now, which meant that these useless losers weren't sitting next to him. When he saw Maki and Power hop on the roof, Aizawa sat down in his front seat and simply sighed. After extracting a flask from his pocket, he took a swig. "Thank Kami Nezu doesn't care that I have this as long as I don't get drunk or don't drink too much," he was thinking. Sue looked at Himiko and said, "Hey Himiko, I tend to speak what's on my mind and I have a question." Ochako blushed as Izuku leaned slightly in her direction. Then, as Himiko asked, "What is it, Asui?" he leaned over so he could see her. After receiving a nod from her, she said, call me Suyu or Sue. Hiro, she said, why are you so attached to Midoriya even though you two aren't dating? And put a finger to her chin. Himiko's smile was a mix of joy and sorrow, and it was both joyful and a little sad. Izuku said, if you want, Himiko, I can respond to her. After shaking her head, Himiko started to clarify that her parents weren't precisely pleasant considering her blood quirk, but she met Izuku a few years ago, who transformed her life, and she now lives with him in his house without using her parents' last name. Then she put her arms around Izuku's head and pressed his face against her huge chest, causing him to flush uncontrollably. Suyu nodded her head in agreement before turning to face Midoriya, who was so red that he looked like a strawberry. Midoriya, why is Bakugo so rude to you and calls you Deku? Since Izuku really didn't want to disclose his past, that caused him to freeze, clench his jaw shut, and look pale as the blushing all but vanished. Even Himiko was not fully aware of everything. Almost everyone on the bus gave Katsuki glares when he said, because he's a fucking worthless piece of quirkless trash. With a slightly narrowed gaze, Kirishima remarked, but Midoriya has a quirk and we've all seen it. He detested the way that people treat those who don't have quirks as second-class citizens or even less human. Katsuki was about to add, tch it because he was quirkless, but he was silenced by Aizawa's single glare. We all know that quirkless people are nothing more than slaves for our society, and they have to pay extra taxes and triple the price for everything as reparations for the war they caused us, Iida said, ignoring Katsuki's clenched teeth in rage. Then, since he was fully aware of that code, he pushed his glasses up. Oh yeah, I know about that, replied Mineta. My parents own a store, and since we have a bunch of quirkless people who shop at it, we make lots of money. My mom is even trying to get one to work at our store so we can use them for extremely cheap labor. The bus received a range of responses, but the majority were hateful and couldn't comprehend why people, especially heroes, who had vowed to protect everyone, were so cruel to the ordinary people. Himiko's eyes widened as her mind began to work, and she at last recognized the mark on the side of his temple. It was a brand to demonstrate his lack of eccentricities. She was on the verge of screaming at the Bakugo, Iida, and now Mineta because she was feeling angry. The bus halted at the USJ, and Aizawa informed them that they had arrived before a very, very heated argument could begin. In an attempt to regain control of the situation before Himiko lost it, or, worse, Izuku's summons did something, he hurriedly said, we are here, everyone off the bus. Himiko got up right away, grabbed Izuku's hand, and pulled him along with her as they exited the bus. The others who were seated close to him quickly followed suit, and before long, everyone was leaving. However, Aizawa scowled at 3 individuals, promising to speak with them after this lesson. Himiko buried her face in the crook of Izuku's neck and gave him a tight hug as soon as they were a distance away. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry you had to go through that, she said at the end. It's okay, Himiko. It's in the past and I need to get stronger and move past it, Izuku said with a sorrowful smile as he gave her a hug and pat on the back. Without letting go, she asked, see, can I do anything to help? Just be you and keep smiling. Also please don't tell anyone. I don't want to lose friends because of my past, Izuku said, gently cupping her chin so he could look her in the eyes. Before they held each other for a little while longer, Himiko gave a nod. Himiko continued to hold his arm as they walked and joined the others, and they all noticed that Rescue Hero 13 was standing in front of them. Ochako was ecstatic to see her favorite hero and exclaimed, oh my gosh, it's 13. She added, I wish she'd reveal her identity, I bet she's really pretty. Izuku remarked, oh, she is beautiful, not yet realizing the jealous looks he was receiving. Ochako asked in shock, wait, you've seen her without her helmet before? When I was here learning how to use my quirk, I met her when she had her hero off. She was a bit embarrassed and asked me not to tell anyone what she looks like, since she likes privacy, Izuku replied. 13 got everyone's attention by saying, hello class, I'm so happy to see you all here. However, she briefly smiled when she noticed Izuku in the crowd before regaining her composure. Now as some of you may know, I'm the Rescue Hero 13 and I mainly operate in rescue missions over combat. My quirk is very useful for that, but also extremely dangerous given if I'm not careful I could seriously hurt or worse kill someone. Now I'm sure that all of you now have experience with how to use your quirks or how dangerous they are. Her eyes narrowed at a certain pale blonde student, but no one could see. While here today, You will learn how to rescue people in unforeseen situations like building fires, rock slides, floods, earthquakes, sinking ships, mountains and downpour, or as we call it, monsoons, stated 13. Everyone was thrilled when 13 started to usher them inside, and they were all astounded by what they saw. Before his eyes spotted a purple portal opening up as the light began to flicker, Kirishima exclaimed, "Wow," in shock. "What's that?" he asked, growing anxious. The two teachers were filled with a mixture of disbelief and fear for the students when they looked down and saw the portal. A tall, lanky man with bluish-white hair emerged as the portal fully opened, his hands all over his body. Izuku told Power and Maki to stay at home and unwind, so he was shocked when the doors just behind them exploded open and they both entered. However, he was unable to focus on that because his gaze returned to the villain, who had completely emerged from the portal with his arms and upper body encased in hands. Then, a little irritated that All Might wasn't present, he looked up and shrugged as the portal behind him widened even more and hundreds of villains emerged. He grinned viciously behind his mask and said, "Hello everyone, we are the League of Villains and we are here to kill All Might and all you." He reached for his goggles and placed them on his head, saying, 13 get the students out of here, I'll buy all of you time to escape. Wait Aizawa-sensei, your combat is more based around sneak attacks and quick takedowns of single villains, not large groups, let us help you, Izuku replied. Before he leapt down the stairs, he said, sorry but no, Midoriya. It's my responsibility as your teacher to protect you all. Also, as a hero, you have to have lots of tricks. He landed ahead of the villains, sped forward at breakneck speed, and used his quirk to stop a few of them from using it. He jumped and got close before slamming his heel into them, breaking her collarbone. He then spun around and threw his scarf around another villain, pulling it painfully until it tore his arm from its docket. He then ducked a punch, grabbed the arm, snapped the bone, and slammed his elbow into his jaw, shattering it. The misty villain behind the man with hands on his body vanished as soon as Aizawa blinked, sensing that his eyes were beginning to sting. He muttered to himself, damn it, I blinked for a fraction of a second and he already disappeared, but he was unable to concentrate. He had to eliminate all of the villains that surrounded him as quickly as possible. 13 of the students attempted to flee through the door, but the hazy villain materialized in front of the door as a huge figure with bright yellow eyes. Before choosing to introduce himself, he said, my name is Kurogiri, and we are from the League of Villains. I'm sorry, but I can't allow you to leave. Kirishima positioned himself in front of his classmates right away, hardening his arms to serve as a shield and keep them safe. 13 was about to attack the villain when Katsuki lunged forward and detonated a huge explosion to destroy him, but the villain just laughed and it went right through him. Fool, now you made my job easier. Now scatter. Portals appeared all around them at once, and nearly everyone was drawn in. Izuku watched Himiko vanish into another one before he fell, so he turned to look at Maki and Power. Both of you protect Everyo. When he looked up after falling to the ground, Izuku saw that he was in the middle of the swarm of bad guys that Aizawa was battling. When the teacher saw Izuku, he made every effort to approach him in order to keep him safe. He started to sprint ahead, ruthlessly eliminating villains until he came to rest beside Izuku. Then he turned and faced the villains in front of him. He asked, Midoriya, what just happened? That gas-like villain just opened a portal and suddenly I fell through and now I'm here, said the man. As much as he hated to admit it, he shook his head and said, shit, that means the rest of the class is separated. If there were more villains strewn about the USJ, he could only hope they were resilient enough to hold out until he or 13 came to their aid. Kurogiri brought us some new toys. All of you, go kill the teacher. But bring that green-haired teen to me, I think he's the one Master wanted, the man replied. Aizawa immediately returned to battle to try to keep them away from Izuku after they all charged, but some managed to get past his defense. Before he could prepare to defend himself, one of his Nazgûls emerged from his book with Izuku. He appeared slightly different, wearing a mask made of metal, and holding a huge mace in one hand and a huge morning star in the other. Before he turned and threw his morning star at a big villain, breaking his arm and sending him flying, the Nazgûl stepped forward and swung the mace, instantly eliminating 4 villains. Izuku wasn't going to stand by either, so he summoned the worm in his mind. It materialized instantly and encircled his body as Nightcrawler transformed back into his coat form. Izuku quickly grabbed the playful cloud that the worm spat out. Midoriya, I give you permission, take these villains out until you see a chance to escape, Aizawa said, although he didn't want to. Yes, sensei, he said, then proceeded to use Sebas's explosive strength in conjunction with Playful Cloud to swing it at a villain. The villain's interest was piqued by the blow, which was comparable to the Nazgul's, and sent him into the lake behind Shigaraki. After all, this teenager had a sentient quirk that created that dark warrior thing, and then a worm-like creature appeared and wrapped itself around his body. Before that raven, he had transformed into a coat that encircled his body. Shigaraki kept watching Izuku and started to understand why his master was so interested. He grinned beneath his mask and remarked, "He, I think it's time to prepare the Nomu." Katsuki, Kirishima, and Himiko were all engaged in combat with the villains in the city zone. While Kirishima was behaving like a tank and then slugging them hard enough to knock them out, Katsuki was destroying them all with his strong and aggressive explosions. According to Himiko, she was moving at a breakneck speed while striking the villain's body with lightning-fast accuracy, or even cutting them with her knife to increase their suffering and hasten their surrender. When Katsuki saw that the vampire was approaching him, he let out another huge explosion, and a dark smile appeared on his face as he thought of a way to exact revenge. His erratic explosions began to injure her, with some of them striking her. After a few more seconds, he realized that he had a real chance because a villain was approaching her. He then detonated a huge explosion in that direction, hitting Himiko and the villain. He could sense her flying and slamming into the wall, which rendered her unconscious. Kirishima snapped, "Bakugo, why did you do that?" He yelled. "She got in my way when I was taking out the villains, now fuck off." And strode off, unconcerned. Since Kirishima was accustomed to doing this with Mina when she ran out of energy, he narrowed his eyes before approaching the unconscious Himiko. "Sorry about this," he said, carefully picking her up and placing her on his back. He got up and started to follow Katsuki because, regrettably, he needed his assistance because it would be difficult for him to defend Himiko and fight off more villains. However, he knew that Izuku would be furious upon hearing this as he carried her. Todoroki was defending Toru from villains in other parts of the USJ. In another scene, Maki assisted Denki, Momo, and Kyoka in battling the local bad guys. Power, meanwhile, was giggling uncontrollably as she and Tokiyami defeated villains in the monsoon zone. Alongside Mineta and Sue, she detested his constant attempts to touch her and had to keep saving the perverted grape, and once was successful. Then, back at the entrance, Iida was able to get away while Kurogiri was diverted by the others long enough for him to get out of the building and start running in the direction of Ua. While Nezu was attempting to contact All Might, who was presently battling a villain somewhere else, Sebas called Ua because he sensed what was happening with Izuku and the teachers were now mobilizing. He needed to let them know what was happening. With the help of Izuku, Aizawa, and the Nazgul, they have been able to reduce the number of villains to just 15. Shigaraki stepped forward and started clapping just as the three were about to resume their fight. "I must say, heroes, you did an impressive job. Though, playtime is over, don't you agree, Kurogiri?" he grumbled. "Indeed, Shigaraki. Also, one of the students escaped," the gas-like villain said, gesturing as though he nodded his head. Shigaraki would normally have thrown a fit, but he managed to maintain his composure after recalling a conversation he had with his master. "Then let's get this over with and bring out the Nomu." Before Aizawa could use his quirk, a huge black monster fell out of a portal and landed on its legs. Its body was larger than All Might, and it had thick black skin with some scars. On its head, it had a beak-like mouth, eyes without lids, and an exposed brain with a thin layer covering it to prevent the organ from drying out. Despite being repulsed by the creature in front of it, the Nazgul instantly placed its body in front of Izuku to shield him. They were caught off guard when the final villains charged forward before any of them could fully prepare. "Nomu, take out the one with long hair." Aizawa started to move and remove them when the Nomu materialized in front of him. It grabbed his arm and broke it almost immediately before picking him up and slamming him to the ground, causing Aizawa to scream in agony. The Nomu gave Aizawa a quick glance before lifting its arm and slamming it into his body once more. The force and size of that hand caused his ribs, hip, and upper legs to break. "Sensei Aizawa," Izuku screamed in horror as he watched his teacher be destroyed in a matter of seconds. Shigaraki remarked, "Oh right, Nomu, capture him, kill the others." The Nomu quickly sliced through the villains like a hot knife slices through butter. It then proceeded to murder the Nazgul, but amazingly, its strength was insufficient to halt the Namus's attack. When the Nomu noticed movement in the corner of its eyes, it turned its head and saw Izuku slamming the playful cloud so hard that it destroyed the left eye completely and actually went into the Nomu's head. The Nomu tilted its head slightly in confusion before raising its arm to try to kill it again. The Nomu simply applied more pressure and sent the Nazgul away before it grabbed the playful cloud, not even caring that its left eye was gone, Izuku realized as he was about to launch another attack. When Nightcrawler saw the approaching hand, it instantly drew Izuku away from the monster in front of them. The Nomu turned to face Izuku and yanked playful cloud from its eye before throwing it aside. Just as it was ready to move, Izuku abruptly raised his arm. Khan! A huge fox head materialized out of thin air right away, and Khan devoured the Nomu while chopping off its lower legs. Khan said, "Master, this creature tastes foul." Then she felt movement, and the Nomu began to pry open her mouth, which, when fully opened, showed that the Nomu had fully recovered from its wounds. Izuku started to shake in fear before he called out for another weapon, as the worm spat out a sword which Izuku immediately grabbed. The Nomu fully pried its way out of Khan's mouth, before it punched her hard enough that she disappeared from the injury. It then appeared in front of Izuku and grabbed him while he began to frantically slash the sword against the Nomu, but it didn't even scratch its skin. It began to crush him, to make him pass out, but then it stopped and stared at Izuku, more specifically somewhere else. Izuku followed the monster's line of sight and his one eyes went wide in horror. The book began to move on its own as if it was coming to life. It then started to shake even more before it fell on the ground and shook more violently. Shigaraki was beyond confused at seeing this, since from what he saw, summons only come from Izuku himself or if he calls it out, yet the book was moving on its own. "Nomu here," he snapped. It instantly dropped Izuku and appeared in front of Shigaraki to protect its master. He didn't know why but something evil was leaving that book and his senses told him to call back the Nomu. Then suddenly the book shook more violently as the entire USJ started to shake as it then sounded like a distant echoing type scream was heard throughout the entire USJ. The shaking grew more intense before the book snapped open and blood began to form on the open pages as it drew itself while the excess oozed off and began to form a puddle around the book. Shigaraki grew beyond curious that completely outweighed the fear he felt that kept filling him and unknowingly filling everyone present in the USJ. Inside the summoning world, the massive gate was cracking more and more as massive claws shot out, almost cleaving one of the Nazgul in half. Then the monster behind it smashed its head against the gate making it break more, revealing more and more of itself. Another claw shot out of the gate and the monster looked out into the summoning world and let out a roar that sent fear throughout the entire world. Back at Izuku's home, the summons outside of it all felt it and all the ones not meant for combat fell to their knees in absolute terror. Sebas was trying to keep his composure himself but was finding it impossible. He then heard the thing inside that gate scream and pure primal fear entered himself while some of the maids began screaming in fear or just crying. For Izuku his fear reached an all-time high seeing this and not knowing what was happening. He didn't even realize that all 9 Nazgul have appeared and were standing in front of him now, protecting him since they couldn't hold it back at the gate anymore. The drawing soon finished and blood stopped oozing from the book. It was now just a steady stream exiting it and everything stopped. No more shaking or wails were heard from it. The wraiths started to slightly drop their guard not knowing why it stopped. But then, blood exploded from the book like a geyser, covering the ground and hitting the ceiling itself. As it did this, everyone felt it. Something came out and was here now. Just as fast as the blood started to shoot off, it stopped and now the book just sat where it was, without a drop of blood staining it. The only blood on the book was the drawing on it. They were all confused what happened until they heard a very faint growl and everyone near the book all looked up at the ceiling and complete carnal fear, dread and more entered them, but most importantly the feeling that they will die. Above them all was a creature out of nightmares as its long black, skeletal body slowly looked down showing its bone-like head with 2 large horns and red piercing eyes that stared directly at Shigaraki and the Nomu. Above them all was a creature out of nightmares as its long black, skeletal body slowly looked down showing its bone-like head with 2 large horns and red piercing eyes that stared directly at Shigaraki and the Nomu. The Juggernaut has been summoned.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.